Olá, muito bom dia a todos.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the big Auditorium Iscte for the International Conference Social Impact, People at the Heart of Cultural Organizations. And since we're talking about people, I'd like to first and foremost thank everyone who made this conference possible. The team at PNA, the team at Iscte, the team at DGEST, the team at DGPC, and the team at Art Central. This conference is a hybrid conference. People are remotely in here, and there is remote interpretation into English. It will be web streamed at the DGEST YouTube channel, and it will be stored to be watched later on. This is a conference in Portuguese, and there will be two conferences, two presentations in English and one in Portuguese. As for sign language, we have Valentina Carvalho and Sofia Soares. There will be three debates in the morning and in the afternoon. And at that time, you'll be able to ask questions in the room, but people at home can also ask questions via chat. Teachers who need accreditation must follow the instructions sent yesterday by the training center. They've been sent to your email. You must have filled out a form. Non-teachers who just want a statement that they were here, they need to fill in the form they received by email. If they have any issues, they can go to the reception. Let me summarize the morning. There will be an opening. Then we'll have the keynote speaker, Alessandro Bolno. And then we'll talk. We'll present CISOC. We'll have guests from the outside who will be scrutinizing this project at this early stage. And then we'll have our discussion. Now, without further ado, I'd like to give the floor to Maria de Lourdes Rodrigues, the Dean at Iscte, Paulo Pires Duval, National Commissioner for the Arts. Thank you very much.
Muito bom dia a todos, bem-vindos.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome. It's a pleasure to have you here at Iscte, to welcome you. I hope you feel at home, and I hope this environment is conducive to reflection on all the activities that have been developed since they created the PNA, the National Plan for the Arts. All the monitoring mechanisms, the creation of indicators that allow us to assess all the work that has been carried out. It's one of the most important initiatives when launching public policy programs and public intervention programs. Unless you know the impact, the hardships, the issues, the hurdles, and what you can and cannot do with any given initiative, without the initiative that allows us to reflect on and have better knowledge of our action, the results of our actions, it will always be tougher to improve. It will be tougher to get further. Coming up with indicators, assessment, monitoring public policies, this is something that is it's developed a myriad of actions in
Investigação.
institutional, etc. There's a number of public intervention areas that have researchers, professors at Iscte who do this monitoring, and they try to help us improve and help improve public policies. The purpose is to go a little bit further and to improve. We're very happy to welcome this initiative. We were very happy to develop this initiative with the National Plan for the Arts. This is the first thing that I'd like to say. Please, I'd like you to feel at home. This initiative is the National Plan for the Arts. And its task of enriching what schools already do. Schools play an essential role in Portuguese society. We could never come up with another institution that solved the same issues that societies face. There's no other institution that helps prepare future generations. Whatever the future may bring, for several centuries, schools have been present and they've been anticipating the future and they've been preparing new generations for the future. This is almost a mystery. There's some concern about whether or not teaching, the way we teach, is right for the future. But over time, over centuries even, without there being a central decision, schools and teachers have always been able to anticipate the future and prepare new generations. One of the major challenges we face is as follows. In order to anticipate the future and prepare new generations, what is essential and what we need to separate what is essential from what is not. Reading, mathematics. Without these two core skills, there will be no future for any child or any young person. But we know more and more accurately that complementary training and teaching, the ability to access other types of information, is also key for the development of children. And taking into account all my background history, I need to recall the words of an educator, a pioneer who tried to connect school to cultural activities. Manuel Patricio, some of you are, I'm sure, aware of his work. There was enormous work, and since then there have been several initiatives and attempts to feed this perception that broadening the school to cultural activities is essential for the future of children and for the future of the country. The National Plan for the Arts is based on this type of approach. We want to make school the place where children meet cinema, literature, of course, but painting, museums, history museums, or other types of museums as well. More often than not, this is a key opportunity to change the lives of these children, to change their perception of the world. I used to say that if each school organized a field trip each year, when they reached the 9th grade, they would have been to 9 museums or 9 institutions, cultural institutions. This is still a concern. Public interventions have to keep up with the times, as they should, and we see throughout the country museums and cultural institutions, Cinematheca, Serralves Foundation, etc. And this is not an exclusive list by all means. Throughout many museums and many cultural related institutions, we see educational services that are exemplary. And the concern these institutions show to education and activities geared towards young people, this is very important. It has been crucial for children who, without this link between schools and the educational services of these institutions, would have no chance, because their families cannot sometimes access culture like schools can. Schools can play a difference, and I'd like to greet all the concerns displayed. There's been a lot of activity between cultural bodies and schools, and I'd like to stress how relevant, how important this work is, and how it can be absolutely key for each child who benefits from this type of activity. This enriches school and children. And this type of action will bring people, and young people especially, to the center of their activity. I thank you for being here. I highly rate your work. I hope you keep at it, doing something that will allow people to improve and to reach further. Thank you very much.
Muito obrigado, Sr. Reitor.
Thank you, Madam Dean. Thank you for welcoming us here. Thank you for your introduction, which was pitch perfect. I'd like to thank the Observatory and João Soares Neves. It's a joy for us to be here and now. CISOC, this commitment to social impact of cultural bodies, is one of the measures we put forth in 2019 when we presented our strategic plan for the National Plan for the Arts. And now publicly we're here, and to be able to present our results here today in this room, it's a privilege. I don't usually read what I'm here to say, but it was my birthday yesterday, so I'm a bit hungover. I hope you'll forgive me. Maybe we should sing happy birthday. No, that's just as well. But please forgive me for having to read. This was just a very small caveat. What Madam Dean just said is key. Someone once said that education will be all the better when it's an act of policy, an act of knowledge, an ethical commitment, and an aesthetic experience. And so to have a national plan for the arts joining cultural and education could never ever think of school as a closed space. We always wanted to work with all sectors, especially the culture sector, in order to bring culture to schools, and not just within schools. And now I'd like to read my presentation and bring to mind the role that cultural institutions can play in this project. Cultural institutions are not neutral players. They have a mission, they're present in the public space. The way they relate to communities, the decisions they make, the way they work, production, mediation, and access. All these choices are political and never neutral, even if sometimes people may not be thinking of them. How can cultural institutions serve life and make themselves irrelevant? How can they resist turning into oppressors of one class over another? They bring together history, they can reproduce prejudice. How can they treat people in all their diversity as collaborators, participants, and not just consumers? The way they help or not emancipate citizens and help us take part in our collective lives. They contribute to the health of democracy. They can play a role in education. This commitment to the social impact of cultural institution is a theoretical and practical tool. And I say theoretical because we propose a change in paradigm and model, and they want to help the rulers and museums, museum libraries, and other spaces. They need to become more and more relevant for their communities and help citizens become more responsible, more aware, and more effectively display their and use their citizenship. It's important to implement strategies to strengthen awareness. This is a device, it's a number of documents that help establish models, paradigms, and concepts, identify priorities, define strategies, targets, and assessment criteria, and structure cultural institutions as inclusive and to places of education. They can also help develop schools and universities as cultural hubs, allowing citizens to experience how heritage and art can be an inclusion, cohesion, and belonging factors key in their training as a whole. And therefore it's important that these cultural bodies work towards promoting cultural democracy based on plurality, power sharing, and knowing the various voices and various cultures. Culture should be a plural world. We should stop working for and working with. This is what is proposed in the Charter of Porto Santo, and we want to turn institutions into exstitutions. The goal of my presentation is to talk about social commitment as an exstitutional tool, which is a word that we propose. When we presented the National Plan for the Arts in 2019, it was clear that in order to bring all these artistic and cultural demonstrations, bring them closer to communities, we couldn't just target schools. We had to plan measures with everyone, with the whole village. This principle led us to propose drafting a contract between governments and the teams at the institutions to assess their social and educational progress and draft targets. We thank Cláudia Camacho for leading this team. I have had the chance to thank José Soares Naves, but now I'd like to thank Maria Amélia Fernandes and Flora Maravilhas, who isn't here. Well, she's here, but I haven't seen her yet. And these people accompanied this project, which was led by Clara, whom I thank again. And I thank DGPC the ability for having lent Clara to us. It was a privilege working together in developing this measure. I thank you for so passionately taking on this challenge. Your commitment was clear in the depth and the exacting nature of these documents. I'd like to thank some of our institutions that helped test and improve this commitment. This commitment is already a manifestation of a certain style and type, more than just content or indoctrination. This is the reflection of how institutions relate to others and their role in this world. And this tool has been shown that it trusts the intelligence of the community, and this has been very important in trying to work as partners, not being self-sufficient. It was important to leave its shackles behind and not fear conflict. This National Plan for the Arts, if it has any teaching abilities, it's the ability to teach this yearning. This is a management support document that needs political support to be implemented. We think cultural bodies can help enriching the lives of many citizens and fight their predetermined destinies set out by their cultural and social limitations. Cultural bodies need to broaden the horizons of each person and allow each person to find themselves and find new breadths that they didn't know they had. Thank you so much for being here. And, well, this round of applause will be to you if you implement this commitment. So now I'll be expecting to see the next steps. This is like getting married. This is day one. This is not the end in itself, but we need to keep yearning and longing for more. We need cultural bodies to implement this, and we want to see this fire rage throughout the country. Thank you so much.
To close this opening session, unfortunately, the Minister of Education, João Costa, due to a busy agenda, could not be here today, but we will have now a video from the Minister of Culture, Pedro Adão e Silva. Good morning. Due to my busy agenda, I cannot be in Lisbon today. I would like to send you these greetings, in special to the National Plan of the Arts, but also to the Portuguese Observatory of the Arts and the Iscte, the organizers of this conference. I'm sorry, but we do not have the sound of the video, so we are just looking at the subtitles, which is not so easy to read. Analyzing public policies in this event is most important. It is a theme that has been for a long time neglected, and as far as culture is concerned, it's even more clear. It's a good sign that this matter will get now more attention. I would say it's a growing and generalized recognition. Culture is part of many parts of our life. 20 years ago, there is not the we were not so much aware about the relevance of Apparently, we are going back to the beginning of it. So, good morning. Due to my agenda, it's not possible for me to be in Lisbon today. Just wanted to send you a word of greetings to the National Plan for the Arts and the Portuguese Observatory of Cultural Activities, CISOC, the organizers of this conference. Social impact of organizations in culture is a theme very dear to me, as you know. Even before taking office as Minister, public policies were already my area of focus. And this matter has been neglected for a long time, and as far as culture is concerned, it is even more clear. So it is a good sign the attention this matter has been getting in the past years. I would say it shows a growing and generalized recognition for a new social and political consensus on the importance of culture in many dimensions of our lives. I'd say that 20 years ago, we were not so much aware as we are today about the relevance of public policies for culture on the economic activity, social impact, the role that culture plays in creating a feeling of belonging and participation in collective life, the consciousness that we're part of a broader community than just our day-to-day lives. Today there is also a broader consciousness that the inequalities to creation culture have consequences on people's lives, reproducing and reinforcing other types of inequalities. Culture is not something ethereal. It regards the day-to-day, and it can be translated in every day's dimension, like health and well-being. So it is the bound we have with a community that is important and that culture will promote, so that broader populations, a part of the population will have access to museums, libraries, theaters, visual arts centers. And this means that these institutions have to be open to the culture outside them. Therefore, I agreed commitment of the social impact of cultural organizations. I think it is an important instrument to help cultural organizations have a more clear notion about the effect of their work on populations, adapting their activities in function of that. Culture cannot and should not be seen as a mere professional activity that those that work in the area work, because otherwise it will have public disinvestment. Culture has to be understood not just as trying to learn about things in a more erudite manner, but as something that gives us a feeling of belonging and participation in the collective cultural life. So finally, we should treat culture as a core element of citizenship. I hope you have an excellent work day and a fruitful debate, and I am certain very useful debate. Thank you.
Então, agora vamos...
It's time to start the opening lecture with our keynote speaker, Alexandro Bolo, cultural manager. The theme is Manage the Social Impact in the Cultural World, Challenges and Impacts. I call on stage the speaker, the keynote speaker, and Mrs. Monteiro, director of a museum in Lisbon, and she will then speak afterwards. Bem-vindo, Alexandro. Bem-vindo.
Bom dia para todos. Unfortunately, these are the only words that I know in Portuguese.
Estas são as únicas palavras que eu consigo dizer em português. Vou então fazer a minha intervenção em inglês. Bom dia a todos. Muito obrigado aos organizadores deste evento pelo convite. É um prazer, uma honra para mim ter sido convidado para esta conferência e ter a possibilidade de trazer aqui algumas reflexões sobre os impactos sociais no setor cultural e de ouvir também as intervenções interessantes que se seguirão. Uma perspectiva é de alguém que, por vezes, tem estado envolvido na investigação, avaliação sobre os impactos nos efeitos das ações culturais, nomeadamente aqueles efeitos resultantes da participação cultural e do envolvimento das pessoas, mas também sou diretor e gestor de uma instituição cultural. Um destes diretores e gestores de atividades que no seu dia-a-dia têm que medir e partilhar os resultados das suas atividades e demonstrar a sua relevância. E por vezes mesmo a ter que lutar por recursos económicos. Algo que nós sabemos não ser fácil. A minha intervenção, por isso, vai tentar conciliar uma perspectiva mais académica com as necessidades e o problema operacional das instituições culturais. Para responder à questão de medir os impactos sociais na área da cultura, exige desde já uma primeira reflexão sobre o papel das instituições culturais no contexto contemporâneo. Estou a pensar agora naqueles que trabalham com o património cultural, mas também nas várias realidades, nomeadamente nas artes performativas. Estes papéis parecem ter vindo a mudar muito, se considerarmos pelo menos as últimas 2 décadas deste novo milénio. É claro que as alterações globais têm afetado profundamente o panorama cultural, social, tecnológico, económica e afetam depois também as infraestruturas da cultura e do conhecimento a que nos estamos aqui a referir. Para além disso, a Covid-19 funcionou como um catalisador de muitos destes processos, juntamente com a digitalização, a criação dos espaços públicos, a atividade social e todos os modos de participação. Mas os desafios que as instituições culturais enfrentam não são apenas ditados pelas mudanças nos cenários e contextos de referência, são também alimentados pelas alterações na sensibilidade política e nas políticas setoriais e gerais. Políticas que nas últimas décadas, estou aqui a pensar nos últimos 25, 30 anos, levaram as instituições a alargar as suas tarefas e a produzir toda uma série de externalidades geradas pela ação cultural. A ação cultural tornou-se assim cada vez mais instrumental na busca de vários tipos de objetivos, do tipo social, cívico, turístico, económico, o planeamento urbano, educação e relacionados com o bem-estar das pessoas. A participação, mais uma vez, tem sido uma das palavras-chave nos últimos anos e uma das principais incidências das políticas culturais, nomeadamente na Europa, como sabe. E se virmos rapidamente na segunda parte do século XX, a participação, mais uma vez, tem sido uma questão fundamental da política cultural, a questão da democratização cultural em França, por exemplo, ou o modelo de abordagem da democracia cultural em Espanha, só para vos dar aqui 2 abordagens diferentes. Mas, a partir do novo milénio, uma visão mais articulada, mais complexa, tem vindo a ser imposta, em que a participação não se limita ao conceito da cultura, mas também como uma oportunidade de alargar a base social e fazer com que as artes sejam acessíveis a todos, alimentando vários processos nas áreas cultural, económica e social. Ainda que os resultados deste desenvolvimento tenham sido depois reduzidos nos anos 80, nomeadamente no Reino Unido e nos Estados Unidos, foi a partir do início dos anos 2000 que o conceito de desenvolvimento dos públicos e envolvimento dos públicos tem vindo a ser imposto como ferramentas não apenas para melhorar o desempenho económico, mas também como abordagens e dispositivos para o envolvimento de outros públicos mais difíceis de alcançar. Uma participação mais alargada
not only because it would allow the cultural system to survive and to develop, but because the belief that participation and cultural practice were correlated with positive effects for individuals and for the socio-economic context grew. Participation has gradually been associated with the goals of civic wealth creation, resilience of local communities, sustainable urban development, competitiveness of territories, and as I will say later, but it also been linked to the more individual dimension of well-being, of creativity, of growth, of self-realization of people. For example, the connection between cultural participation and people's well-being is becoming more significant both in terms of policy guidelines in Europe and abroad, and particularly particularly in terms
só,
of practices and experimentation.
práticas cada vez mais
Today we know,
experimentais.
because
Sabemos
of vast
hoje,
scientific literature
devido
tell
à
us about it,
literatura
that
científica
involvement in
que temos,
cultural
que o envolvimento
activities
nas
can
atividades
bring a
culturais
wide range of
pode
benefits
trazer toda uma série
to
de
their general
benefícios
well-being,
ao bem-estar
positively
geral,
affecting both
que
the
afetam
mental and the
positivamente
physical
tanto o
health of
bem-estar
people.
mental como
A
físico
study
das
conducted
pessoas.
by the
Estudo levado a
World
cabo
Health Organization in
pela OMS
2019
em 2019
named what is the evidence of the role of the arts in
mostrou o
improving
papel
health and well-being.
das
A scoping
artes em
review
melhorar a saúde e
synthesizes
bem-estar
the global evidence on the
e
role of the arts
sintetiza
in improving health and well-being.
realmente o
The
papel das artes
results,
na melhoria
stemming
do
from
bem-estar e
over
da saúde.
3,000 studies,
Resultados que são do resultado de uma
identify
meta-análise
a
de mais
major
de
role
3
for
mil
the
estudos
arts
que
in the
identificam
prevention
que
of
a
ill
arte tem um
health,
papel
promotion
fundamental na
of
promoção
health,
da
and
saúde,
management and treatment of
evitar a
illness across
doença e
the
também
lifespan.
nos próprios tratamentos de doenças.
So we can say that many
Portanto, podemos
things have
constatar que
changed
muitas
in a
coisas mudaram
relatively little time.
em relativamente pouco
If you
tempo.
think about it, only 20, 25
Se
years
pensarmos
ago
que
in
apenas
Italy,
25 anos em Itália,
but I think this reflection can be extended to
mas
Portugal,
esta reflexão
perhaps.
também provavelmente se possa
Museums were
alargar a
asked to
Portugal.
make
Os
the museum,
museus
that is to preserve, research,
serviam
exhibit,
para preservar,
learn to communicate,
fazer
and open to
exposições,
visitors.
aprender a
The same
comunicar com
applies
os
to
visitantes.
libraries, which
Mesmo se
were asked
aplica
to promote
às
study
bibliotecas que
and
tiveram
reading.
promover o estudo e a leitura.
Today, as we know,
Ora,
it's
hoje,
no
como
longer
sabemos,
just a question of
não é apenas
preserving
uma questão de
and making
preservar,
exhibition,
fazer
and it's no
exposições,
longer just a question of loan,
nem tampouco apenas de
consultation, or
emprestar
whatever
livros
fundamental.
ou consultá-los.
Indeed, the broadening of the
efeito,
scope
ao
and the
alargarmos
role
o
of cultural
âmbito
institutions
das
goes hand in hand with the
culturais,
growing need to demonstrate
respondemos à
their
necessidade
value
crescente
by
de
demonstrate
demonstrar o seu
efficiency
valor,
and effectiveness.
eficiência e eficácia.
This requires a strong effort to
Isto
raise
exige
awareness of the
esforço de
multidimensional nature, I
sensibilização
will
para a
stress this word,
natureza
multidimensional nature
sobre a
of the value
multidimensional
that
natureza
cultural institutions
do valor
contribute
que
to
as,
generate and
criado
spread in
pelas
society.
instituições culturais na sociedade.
When contemplating the changes
Ao vermos
faced
as
by cultural
mudanças das
institutions,
instituições,
it's beneficial
com que
to
as instituições
consider
culturais
them.
deparam, importa considerá-las, e o senhor pede desculpa.
Probably these are an old presentation, but anyway, because I've changed a little bit, but anyway,
Enganou-se ali nos slides, mas
doesn't matter.
não tem importância. Que fora
I will say that it's beneficial to
Estava eu a
consider
dizer
them
que
from
é
an
importante
interlocal
considerá-las
perspective.
na
Again, another
perspectiva
important
interlocal.
word, interlocal perspective. I
termo
mean that
importante,
there are global
interlocal.
goals
Ou
and
seja,
challenges
há
that are common to
objetivos
many
globais,
organizations.
desafios a muitas
Think of the goals of
organizações,
the
por exemplo,
2030 UN
objetivos da
agenda,
Agenda
for example,
2030 das
but their
Nações Unidas,
interpretation
mas a
and
sua
implementation is
interpretação
always
e
local and
implementação é
contingent.
sempre
This is
local
interlocal.
e contingente. E é
In
por
this
isso que eu quero dizer quando digo
perspective, the different
interlocal.
communities, for
Portanto, as
example,
diferentes
have
comunidades,
returned to
por
play
exemplo,
an increasingly important role.
têm um papel cada
Cultural
vez mais
institutions are in
importante.
fact
As
being asked to
instituições culturais,
activate
de
and
facto,
to
devem
structure
ativar
paths and processes
estruturar
that are
vias e
participatory,
processos que sejam participados,
collaborative,
colaborativos
and dialogical towards specific reference
e
communities.
relacionados com comunidades
This is also a
específicas.
change. It is the result of structural
Esta
processes
mudança é
that
também o
concern,
resultado de processos,
as we have already mentioned,
como já
the
foram referidos, que
diversification
dizem
of the
respeito à
role of the cultural
diversificação do papel das
institutions,
instituições
and the new
culturais
relevance
e de uma
of
nova
communities
relevância das
in the context
comunidades
of
no
participatory
contexto
processes,
dos processos
civic
participativos,
activism, and horizontal
ativismo cívico
subsidiarity
e
that
subsidiariedade
also touch the
transversal,
world of culture
que também tem a ver
and
com o mundo
cultural
da cultura
heritage.
e do património
In this regards,
cultural.
of course,
Ora,
one
nesta medida,
cannot fail to mention
não
the
podemos
emblematic
deixar de
value
referir
of the
o valor
recent
emblemático
definition of museum, for
recente
example,
definição do
produced by
museu,
ICOM in August
feita pela
2022,
ICOM
that
em agosto de
everybody knows,
2022, que todos
and
conhecem,
we can read it, and
e que está descrita no
of course, a
site.
museum is a not-profit
O
permanent
museu é uma
institution
instituição
in the
sem fins
service
lucrativos, permanente ao
of
serviço
society
da
that
sociedade,
researches,
que faz
collects,
investigação,
conserves,
coleção,
interprets, and
conserva,
exhibits tangible and
interpreta
tangible
e
heritage.
expõe o
Open to the
património
public,
tangível e
accessible
intangível,
and
está aberto ao
inclusive,
público, acessível
museum
inclusive, os
foster
museus
diversity
promovem a
and
diversidade e a sustentabilidade.
They operate and communicate
Funcionam e
ethically,
comunicam de forma
professionally, and
ética,
with the
profissional
participation
e
of
com a participação das
communities,
comunidades,
offering varied
oferecendo
experiences
toda uma
for
série de
education,
experiências para a
enjoyment,
educação,
reflection, and knowledge
usufruto,
sharing.
reflexão e a partilha do conhecimento.
Among the many novelties
Ora,
of
entre as muitas
this
novidades
definition,
desta
here to
definição,
me is important to
aqui
highlight
é
an
importante sublinhar
explicit reference
a
to the
referência
concept of
explícita ao
accessibility,
conceito de
inclusion,
acessibilidade, inclusão,
the promotion of diversity
a
and the
promoção da
sustainability,
diversidade e
and the role of the
sustentabilidade e o
communities
papel das
that are
comunidades,
asked to participate, sharing knowledge
que
and
devem
skills,
permitir
and
participar,
working together
partilhando as
to foster the work
competências
of
e
museum and
conhecimentos
to
e
improve
assim
the
em conjunto
experience they
promover
offer.
a experiência
The
oferecida.
attention to communities,
A
the
atenção dada às
widening of roles,
comunidades,
the
o alargar dos
multi-stakeholder nature
papéis, a
of
natureza
cultural
multipartes
organization,
interessadas, as
and the need to respond
organizações
to
culturais e a
differentiated
necessidade
needs
de responder a necessidades
require to pay
diferenciadas,
attention to the
exige
impact
que
generated,
também
particularly primarily
prestemos
social
atenção ao
ones.
impacto
In this
geral, nomeadamente em
perspective,
termos
social
sociais.
impact
Nesta
should be
medida, o
considered
impacto
in the
social deve ser
frame of a
considerado
multidimensional
no âmbito
evaluation
de uma
approach.
avaliação multidimensional.
Whether we are considering a specific project, an
Quer estamos a
exhibition,
considerar
a
projeto
festival,
específico, uma
a
exposição,
cycle of
festival,
educational initiative,
ciclo,
or
uma
the
iniciativa
continuous
de
activity
ensino,
of a
uma
cultural
atividade
organization
contínua
is very
de uma
important to
organização cultural,
contemplate an
é
approach
sempre importante ter em
that
conta uma abordagem
takes
que
into account the
tenha em
multiple
conta
dimensions
as
and the breadth of the
múltiplas
value that can be
dimensões e
generated.
toda a
This
amplitude
is
de
to
valor
avoid
que pode ser gerada. Isto
adopting
para
methods of
evitar
measurement
adotarmos métodos
and
de
reporting that
medição
are
e relatório
ultimately crushed
que,
only
em
on
última
some metrics,
análise, apenas
for example,
incidam em algumas métricas, por
participation
exemplo,
performances,
participação nos
on some types of value,
desempenhos, ou
for
alguns tipos de
example,
valores,
only
por exemplo,
economic
apenas
impacts,
os impactos
and or
económicos,
some methodological
e também
approaches,
algumas abordagens
again, such as
metodológicas,
quantitative
como
ones.
as
The
natureza
risk is to weaken
quantitativa.
a narrative
O risco
that instead
seria
should
enfraquecer
highlight
uma
how
narrativa que
cultural
deveria
institutions are able to
destacar como
operate
as instituições
effectively
culturais podem
at the
funcionar de forma
intersection of
eficaz
different
na
systems,
interseção de
in
diferentes
which the
sistemas,
artistic and the cultural
em que
domain
o domínio
connects
artístico e
usefully
cultural
with
se
spheres of
interliga
action
com
that
esferas de
concern
ação
social
na
well-being,
área
civic innovation,
social,
urban
inovação cívica,
regeneration,
bem-estar,
tourism,
regeneração
economy,
urbana,
and
economia,
so on. I
turismo,
can
etc.
go on with the list
Podia
of
continuar
these
por aqui adiante
relationships.
com estas relações.
If we analyze this scenario with a historical eye, we note at the
Se
international level
analisarmos
that
isto,
the
temos que, ao nível
predominance of
internacional, a
certain
predominância
categories
de
of
certas
value
categorias de valores
and of evaluative ideologies that have gradually replaced others, reaching
que
recent years
têm
to
vindo
more
a assumir
mature
uma
and aware
preponderância
approaches
e
oriented to
maior maturidade no
multidimensionality.
sentido de uma maior
The question of how to
multidimensionalidade.
value cultural
A questão de como
institutions or
valorizar
activity has been
as
central in the
instituições
cultural
culturais tem
debate
sido
for quite
essencial no
some
debate
time,
cultural desde
as I
algum
said.
tempo para cá.
While in the 80s, for
Nos
example,
anos
the
80,
emphasis
por
was on the
exemplo,
economic
a ênfase
impact
era
on
no
the
impacto
arts
económico
and later on the
das
social
artes e
impact,
depois no
like in
impacto
the
social,
90s.
já nos anos 90.
Matarazzo, François wrote different
Matarazzo
essays on this issue.
e outros
At
autores
present,
falaram
there is
sobre
a
isso,
tendency
mas
to
agora há uma
consider the
tendência para
value
considerar o
of
valor
culture as something quite more complex
da
and
cultura
holistic.
a ter uma
Many
abrangência
authors agree
mais
that
holística.
economic value
Muitos autores
cannot
consideram
fully
que o valor
capture the
económico
cultural
não
value as there are
captura
other
todo o tipo de
characteristics of
valor da
cultural
cultura, porque há
value,
outras características
particularly
do
the
valor
social
da cultura,
aspect,
nomeadamente
which
no
cannot be
aspecto social,
reduced
que não
to
se
a
podem
monetary form.
reduzir a uma forma
This is very
monetária.
important.
Isto é muito
As
importante.
explained by Torsby in
Tal como Torsby
2001,
explicou em
cultural
2001,
value can in
o valor
turn
cultural
be
pode
deconstructed
ser
into
desconstruído
aesthetic,
em
spiritual,
termos estéticos,
social,
espirituais,
historic,
sociais,
symbolic,
históricos,
and education
simbólicos e
values,
de mutação.
each of which contribute to a
Valores
different
estes
facet
contribuem,
and
cada
overall value
para
subsisting
valor
in a
depois
cultural
global
object,
que
in a
se
institution,
reflete num objeto
or in
cultural,
experience
numa
we provide.
instituição ou numa
For this
experiência que foi
perspective, for example, the
disponibilizada. Por exemplo,
four-domain approach that probably you know, created in
a
2015
abordagem
as
dos
part
4
of the
domínios criados em
European
2015 no
project
âmbito do
Cultural
projeto
Heritage
europeu
Council for Europe
Património Cultural
plays
da
a
Europa,
pivotal role
tem
and
um
has
papel
a significant
fundamental
impact on
e
the
impacto
reflection
significativo
methodological approach it used.
na
It is a model designed to
abordagem
assess the impact of cultural
tem a
heritage,
ver
in
com
this
a
case,
avaliação do
on
impacto do
four
património
different
cultural em
domains,
4 domínios diferentes.
namely economy,
Economia,
society,
sociedade,
environment,
ambiente
and culture,
e cultura.
and to highlight the
E
contribution of
destacar a
heritage to the
contribuição
benefit of
do
society
património
and
para o
the
benefício
environment.
da sociedade
It
e do
proposes a
ambiente.
comprehensive and articulated
Tem
approach
uma
that helps
abordagem
to assess and
abrangente,
communicate
articulada,
the
que
importance
permite
and
comunicar
impacts
e
of cultural
avaliar
heritage,
os
also in order
impactos
to
do património
improve
cultural
policy
e assim
formulation,
como a formulação,
stimulating
melhorar a formação
a holistic
de políticas,
evaluation of
estimular a
programs,
avaliação holística dos
projects,
programas,
and operations
projetos e
relating to
operações
heritage.
relacionadas com o
The
património.
model, and this is also interesting,
Este
also
modelo
highlighted the
também destaca
importance of
a
combining
importância de
economic
se conjugar
impacts
os
with
impactos
other
económicos
impacts,
com
in
outros
particular
impactos,
social ones.
nomeadamente os impactos
Also in
sociais.
connection with the
Também
discussion
em
fueled by
relação
the Faro
com a
Convention,
discussão
you know
alimentada
that
pela
on the social
Convenção,
role of heritage and
sabem
in
sobre o
importance
património
of
cultural
community
e a
involvement.
importância do
But
desenvolvimento comunitário.
let us come more directly to social impact.
Mas em relação ao impacto social,
as well,
o social,
cultural impacts are
os impactos
generally more
sociais e culturais
difficult,
são, de
as
uma
we
forma
know, to
geral,
define
mais
and to
difíceis de
measure,
definir, como
also
sabem,
because
de
their
medir,
definition varies
porque
depending on
a
national
definição
contexts
difere de país
and
para
on the
país
actors that are promoting
e
evaluation.
consoante os atores que fazem a
On
avaliação.
one hand, there is a tendency
lado,
to narrow
há uma
the meaning
tendência
of
para
social
limitar
impact
o
to the effects
significado de
that
impacto
cultural
social aos
organizations
efeitos que as
generate
organizações culturais geram
when they equip themselves to address and resolve collective and
respondem
social needs.
às necessidades
For
coletivas e
example,
sociais, por
social
exemplo.
regeneration, social cohesion, combating
Regeneração social,
exclusion,
coesão
and
social,
health
combater
and
a
well-being of
exclusão, saúde
community.
e bem-estar da comunidade.
On the other hand,
Por
these
outro lado,
impacts also
estes
concern
impactos também
impersonal
dizem respeito
development,
aos
the
desenvolvimentos
educational
pessoais, à
dimension,
dimensão
personal well-being,
educativa, ao bem-estar
the
pessoal,
cultural and
ao
creative capital of people
capital
when they come
criativo e
into
cultural
contact
das
with
pessoas
culture,
que entram em contacto com
or the
estas
lot of
manifestações
activities that
culturais
are related to culture.
e as atividades afins.
Quoting Charles Landry, And
Charles
we can
Landry
use this definition, which is quite
disse
broad,
o que está
but
ali
it's
no
very
slide,
interesting.
uma definição
And
ampla,
we could define social
a
impacts,
dizer que os impactos
those effects that go
sociais
beyond
são
the
aqueles efeitos que
artifacts
vão
and
para
the
além
enactment
dos
of the event,
artefactos e
and have a
do evento
continuing
propriamente
influence
dito, tem uma
upon
influência
and
contínua
directly touch people's
e
lives.
direta na vida das pessoas.
Directly touch
Ou
people's
seja,
lives.
tocam
This is,
diretamente a vida das pessoas.
I mean, a sentence that we
Esta
have
é uma
to
frase que
underline.
temos que sublinhar.
So measuring social impacts,
Portanto,
therefore,
medir os
means
impactos
understanding whether
sociais
now
passa por
an
perceber
activity or the
hoje
result of
e
a
como
specific
é que uma
project
atividade ou um
can
resultado
play
de
a
um projeto
role in
específico
the
pode ter um papel
transformation
nos
processes
processos de
of people
transformação
and society.
das pessoas e
Transformation
das sociedades.
processes. We are
Processos
talking
de
about
transformação.
transformation.
Estamos a
And we
falar de
see
transformação.
in this
E
part
vemos
a strong
aqui
connection with the
que
theory
há
of
uma
change,
ligação
for example.
também com a teoria da mudança, por exemplo.
Hence, when evaluating the
Ora,
impact of
quando
cultural
avaliamos
program
os
or a
impactos dos
project,
programas
it
culturais,
is
um
useful to
projeto
consider
cultural,
in the following
temos que
question,
considerar
very
as
simple,
seguintes
but very
perguntas, muito
complex at the
simples,
same
mas ao
time.
mesmo tempo complexas.
What has happened as a result of the program
aconteceu em
or
resultado
project?
desse programa
What
ou
real
projeto?
difference has the activity made to the
Diferença
beneficiaries?
de facto é que esta
How many
atividade fez
people
para os
have been
beneficiários e
affected?
quantas
Three
pessoas foram
simple
afetadas.
but
São
crucial
três perguntas muito
questions.
simples, mas fundamentais.
And this is a
Aqui
probably
temos
quite confused, but this is a map that I've conceived 10 years
esquema
ago.
talvez pouco confuso,
When I
mas
was
que eu
asked to prepare a
elaborei há
book
uns 10
called
anos, quando
Measuring
pediram para fazer
Museum
livro chamado
Impacts in
Medir
the
os
Frame
Impactos
of
dos
the
Museus,
European Land Project,
isto foi no
probably
âmbito de
now this
projeto
map
europeu.
would need to be updated with
Este
new
método agora teria
objectives,
de ser
with new
atualizado, com
sensitivities
novos
and new
objetivos, novas
areas
sensibilidades,
of
novas áreas de
intervention. But
intervenção.
this table
Ou
summarizes
seja,
a
como
relevant
aqui está
number of
resumida
studies
toda
and
uma série,
theoretical
resumida uma
reflection
série
on
de estudos
social
e
impacts
reflexões
towards
teóricas sobre os
touch.
impactos sociais
In
para
this
com
case, with a
a
focus
arte e a
on
cultura.
museum field,
Incidindo aqui na
showing
área
the
dos
different
museus e
categories that
mostrando as
have been
diferentes
used to
categorias
explain
que são
nature,
utilizadas para
range,
explicar
and the political
a natureza
implication of
nas
social
aplicações
impacts.
políticas dos
As we
impactos
can
sociais.
see,
Como podem
for
ver,
many perspectives,
em
the
muitas
social impact
perspectivas, os
range
impactos sociais
encompasses both individual
abrangem tanto a
and societal
dimensão
effects.
individual como social.
Personal development, empowerment, and learning, in a broad sense, are the core of individual impacts, while the production of social value, readable in terms, for example, of social cohesion, social inclusion, and integration, can be considered the key factor of societal impact. But social impacts can also be referred both to intrinsic and instrumental value.
como instrumentais, em termos de valores.
So the map highlights the variety of social
Neste
impacts that
mapa
can be
são
aggregated
destacados os vários
based on the
impactos
fact
que
they
podem
are
ser
defined
agrupados
following an
consoante
intrinsic
os
or
seus
instrumental
efeitos, na sequência,
perspective,
uma
and if the beneficiary is the
avaliação intrínseca ou
society
instrumental,
or
em que o
community
beneficiário será uma
as
sociedade,
a
ou uma
whole, or the
comunidade,
single
no seu todo,
individual.
ou o indivíduo.
Enlarged participation to art forms, contributory forms, cultural and
grande
creative capital are
participação
again
permite reforçar o capital
societal effects that
coletivo.
stems from the
Os
intrinsic
efeitos
value.
sociais aí
But raising
têm
awareness
efeito
towards, for
intrínseco,
example,
mas
the
uma
UN
sensibilização, por exemplo,
2030 agenda
para a agenda das
objectives
Nações
are
Unidas
societal
2030
effects
já
more
são
related to
efeitos sociais
instrumental
mais relacionados com
actions,
umas ações
just to simplify.
instrumentais. Isto
So,
para dar um exemplo.
why I show you this?
Ora, por que é
Because
que eu
each
estou a mostrar
institution
isto?
could
Porque
carry
cada
out the
instituição
exercises
pode levar
of
a cabo
confronting
exercício
itself
de se
with this map,
confrontar com este
trying to
mapa,
identify the objective
tentando
it is already
identificar
pursuing autonomously,
objetivo
those objectives
que
that
já
are the result of a
persegue
request and
e que
negotiation
são o
with its
resultado de uma
stakeholder,
negociação com as partes
those that
interessadas,
perhaps will make
aqueles objetivos
sense
que
to consider,
poderão
but for reasons
vir
of
a
resources
ser
have not yet
considerados,
been
mas que no momento,
addressed.
por falta de
This
recursos,
can
não é
be
possível
a,
considerar.
could be a starting point to set the
Este pode
path
ser
to
ponto de
identify the
partida para
social
estabelecer
impacts
uma
you
via
want
para a
to
identificação dos
analyze,
impactos
you want
sociais
to
que queremos
measure,
analisar,
you
que
want
queremos medir,
to evaluate.
que queremos
So let's go
avaliar.
again to the
Vamos então
complexity
voltar
issue.
à questão da complexidade.
Measurement
Ora,
processes
os processos de medição,
that, as we know, are very
como
complex
sabem,
due
são
to a
muito complexos,
multiplicity
devido a
of
toda uma
factors
série de
that also
fatores
derive from the
que também
fact
resultam do facto
that
de
there are no universal standard
não haver uma
methodologies,
norma
there are no
universal,
plug-and-play
não
solutions,
não há soluções
there are no
aplicação
unique indicators
imediata,
that
não há
identify
indicadores únicos
the social impacts.
que identifiquem
The
facilmente
level
este
of
impacto
complexity
social.
also
O nível
confirms
da
the relevance of the
complexidade
applied
também tem a ver
methods,
com a
the
relevância dos
effective
métodos
ability of
aplicados,
metrics to capture
a
and describe the
eficácia
value
das
of
métricas
transformation,
utilizadas para a
the
descrição da
uncertainty of
transformação,
measurement,
da
especially for
incerteza das
those
medições,
impacts,
nomeadamente
such
naqueles
as the
impactos
cultural and the social that often release effect, and they call effect a low
são
dosage.
chamados efeitos de
Low
baixa
dosage,
dosagem.
because quite
Baixa
often they
dosagem porque
concern a
muitas
small
vezes
number of
dizem
subjects
respeito apenas a um número
involved.
pequeno de
And so in
participantes.
this case it's difficult to
Nestes
measure
casos
the
é
effects.
difícil de medir
But
os
also,
efeitos.
those
Mas
effects
também
occur in the long term,
há aqueles
well beyond the
efeitos de longo
canonical periods of
prazo,
evaluation. This is to
que
me
vão
a very
além do
important
período de
aspect,
avaliação.
the
Este para mim é
time
um
factor.
aspecto importante,
With
o
regard
fator temporal.
to this point,
No que
we can say that time factor has a significant complexity to the assessment of the impacts because often the times of the effects are not reconciled with those of the measurement process, as it is difficult to correlate in the long term the effect with the causes, unless counterfactual analyses are used, but these are very demanding methodologies when referring to the capabilities and the possibilities of a single institution. I want to bring attention to another point, to the crucial operational point that is often overlooked. They need to find a balance between the quality. The quality of deepening in the evaluation process and the need to establish standard and continuous routine. It is important to find a balance between measurement and evaluation ambition and feasibility in terms of available resources and know-how. Very often, the measurement of the social impact of a specific cultural project takes on the characteristic of the extraordinary. It's carried out with a significant effort in terms of internal, external know-how for the research part, but also for the communication and the dissemination. And to me, it becomes important to promote a culture of evaluation and self-assessment that enables institutions to implement monitoring and measurement mechanisms that can identify whether there is a consistent and successful relationship between the key action and the objective set, including those dealing with social impacts, of course. This should happen during the ordinary flow of work and thanks to affordable resources and procedure within the organization itself. In light of this consideration, it's therefore important to recall the relationship between evaluation and strategy. Again, a very key point. In order to develop an appropriate evaluation process, it's also necessary to clarify in advance the objective and the expected results, so that data collection and effectiveness assessment activities will focus on them. The activation of a process of defining and sharing objectives and priorities is therefore essential to make a reasoned judgment of the effectiveness of a specific initiative or on the overall work of a cultural institution. This process is particularly relevant insofar as it is the result of listening and the consultation with the main stakeholders. Stakeholders, in some cases, can have a decision-making role, can also be involved in the initial phase to co-define the main categories of beneficiary of intervention and indirectly also the nature of expected impacts, as well as the investment and the resources needed to achieve the objectives. So stakeholders can be engaged in for different aspects. So we can say that in order to be accountable,
Podemos dizer que para se poder ser responsabilizado é preciso definir, portanto, a gestão onde é que quer ir na fase inicial da governação, do processo de governação, mas a maior parte das entidades culturais têm um processo de planeamento não formalizado que é difícil de transformar numa herança depois de uma mudança da administração. No meu país, até os museus do Estado, que têm uma autonomia especial, obra da legislação italiana, que evolui muito em termos de sistema de abastecimento, tecnologia e comunicação, tirando alguns casos que não têm diretrizes consolidadas e práticas para desenvolver uma abordagem estratégica que se traduza numa responsabilidade dos atores. Não dado adquirido saber que para se poder medir o valor gerado é preciso começar com a missão institucional e o papel transformativo que se quer atribuir aos processos culturais produzidos, e isto é especialmente verdade para os impactos sociais. A escolha, por exemplo, de avaliar um projeto, o número de participantes, os números de visitantes, e os resultados económicos, em vez de alargar o âmbito da análise para se medir o efeito no bem-estar das pessoas e na educação das pessoas e da comunidade, tudo isso depende da ideia que a culturação e o trabalho, a constante capacitação dos recursos humanos das instituições, com um processo contínuo
a
de
demanding
diálogo
but
com
extraordinarily
os atores
important challenge
principais.
in this
Isto é um
particular
desafio muito
phase.
importante nesta
Obrigado.
fase
Thank you.
especial. Muito obrigado.
Muito obrigada. Thank you, Alessandra Bolo. Bom dia a todos.
Good morning,
Quero
everyone.
começar por agradecer
I'd
o
like to
convite
start it by thanking
foi inicialmente endereçado pela Clara
everyone
Camacho
for
ao Museu de Lisboa.
to thank Clara Camacho
e a mim,
for inviting the Lisbon Museum, Museu de
trabalhamos
Lisboa,
sobre
and myself
para participar
to be here
neste
and
projeto
take
no
part in this
CISOC.
project.
E
Take part
por
in CISOC.
ter dado a oportunidade de agora
And for
poder
giving me
comentar
the opportunity
brevemente,
to now very briefly
tanto quanto possível, esta muito
comment
boa
on
conferência de abertura.
this
E também ainda
opening
por
conference.
ter não só a Clara Camacho,
I'd
mas toda a
also
equipa
like to
que a
thank
Clara
Clara
representa
and
neste meu
her whole
brevíssimo
team.
comentário de abertura e de agradecimento. O José Neves, o Observatório, a
José
Amélia,
Neves from the
o
Observatory,
PNA,
Amélia.
o Paulo, a Sara, desculpem
the
uma
National
falta
Plan
de
for the
apelidos
Arts.
e de títulos, mas acho
I'm
que já
sorry
no
if I don't
início
know
foram
everyone's
devidamente
job
apresentados.
description, etc., but I think everyone's
Para
been
que
introduced.
hoje à tarde seja então, e finalmente,
And
depois
this
de
afternoon,
um longo processo
finally,
de trabalho, apresentada a versão
after a
portuguesa
long
do
process,
guia
we'll
da OCDE
present the
para
OECD
museus,
guide
governos
to
locais e
museums,
comunidades,
local governments
que
and
estava a
communities
ser preparada há uns anos,
that
entretanto, com a
was
pandemia
being
e outras
prepared
delongas,
already for a few
nos
years, but then
escaparam
with
da
the
mão,
pandemic and other delays
produziu um atraso
that
maior.
were out of our
Mas
control,
está feito,
was
está
delayed
pronto,
even
será
further,
apresentado hoje
but
pela
it's now ready.
representante
It will
atual
be
da OCDE
presented
neste
by
projeto,
the
a Karen Maguire, que vão
OECD
conhecer mais tarde,
representative in this
e que
project,
também fará
Karen Maguire,
referência ao estudo
and she
que
will
foi feito no âmbito
mention
do
a
arranque
study
desse
that
instrumento
was carried out at
de
the launch
avaliação
of this
pela
assessment
OCDE
instrument.
sobre o
This
Museu de Lisboa,
was carried
a
out by
sua
OECD
tutela e os seus
regarding
stakeholders.
the Lisbon Museum,
Não.
its governments
Just
and stakeholders.
Thank you for. Eu vou ler para ser mais rápida e não me perder.
I will read and try to be as quick as possible.
Completamente.
I will
Thank you
read
for
part
the
of it.
insightful and
obrigado
comprehensive
por esta
presentation on measuring
apresentação
social impact in cultural
tão
sector.
interessante
I
na
think this
medição
is
do
a very
impacto cultural
fantastic
no
way
setor
of
social,
opening the topic that
do
will,
impacto social
of course,
do setor cultural.
certainly unfold
É muito
into
importante
very
e
different
certeza que vai
sub-themes
acabar por se
that probably will be interconnected,
disseminar
adding
em
up
vários
new
subtemas
perspectives to
e
those who were
apresentarão
presented
certamente
just now.
várias
And I
perspectivas
guess
em
that
relação ao
the
tema que
mere
aqui é abordado.
existence
Penso
of
que
this new
simples
social
existência
impact assessment tool,
deste
CISOC,
instrumento
that will be
CISOC,
presented,
da avaliação
resonates
impacto social,
with
irão
what you've referred to
entroncar,
as the changes
ligar-se àquilo que
over the
referiu
last
como
decade,
sendo
mostly,
as alterações na última
of
década.
the political sensitiveness,
A questão que
your
tem a ver com a
words, and
sensibilidade
objectives
política
when
e os
cultural
objetivos
action
políticos
becomes instrumental
quando
and more
a ação cultural
important,
se torna
and
instrumental e
we
cada
may
vez
say
mais importante.
not on top as we would like, but more
E não
important
está
in
tão,
national
não é
and
tão prioritário
local
quanto se queria,
agendas
mas
also.
que está
I
em destaque
enjoyed
nas
the
políticas
idea,
nacionais.
your idea
Eu
of
gostei
the
muito da
cultural
sua ideia
institutions being specialized
de ter
in
as instituições
operating
culturais
at the
como
intersection
especialistas
of
a trabalhar
different
na
systems
interseção de
connecting
vários sistemas,
the arts and heritage, of
interligando o
course, with
património e
other
as artes,
spheres. We know that, the social sphere and the
ligando
economic
as
sphere.
outras
But
esferas,
then
a económica e social.
you give examples, the urban
acabou por dar
regeneration, the
exemplos,
tourism, the
regeneração
entrepreneurship,
urbana, turismo,
the well-being, the
empreendedorismo,
civic
bem-estar
innovation, and
e
so forth.
inovação cívica
Like
e
if
por aí
it
fora.
were an organic body
Como se
that
fosse
is constantly
órgão,
moving, right, and changing,
corpo orgânico
and it's
sempre em
able to
constante movimento
adapt
e
and
alteração e que se
interact
consegue
within
adaptar
different
e
layers of our
interagir
society
com
that
várias
are not
camadas da nossa
sometimes
sociedade
usually
que por
interconnected by
vezes não estão
themselves.
interligadas
So we
por
are
si só.
connecting dots all the time, right?
Ou seja,
You
estamos
agree,
aqui a fazer daqueles
And I
jogos
would
de ligar
just
os
add
pontos.
that I found refreshing
E eu achei
your
muito
upfront
inovadora
attitude,
a sua
acknowledging
atitude
the
ao
difficulties,
reconhecer
not only
as
in Italy,
dificuldades,
I can assure you, in setting up
não só em Itália, como
assessment
noutros países, mas
systems like this,
dificuldades de
systems
em
and
manter
tools
sistemas
that
e
can
instrumentos
be
de
accurate
avaliação
and
que
qualified
possam ser
and
precisos,
regular
qualificados, regulares
and established in standard routines so within an ordinary flow of work, and not as pop-up contingential events that may be easier to concretize, but not certainly as useful as this long-term low dosage. I would like that expression. I don't know if you have something now to say. I will just add a next question if you prefer.
Mas eu tenho uma pergunta a fazer.
I can just comment.
Okay, go ahead.
Eu posso intervir.
I think that, the things that you underline probably are the key points of my presentation, because referring to the last point, for example, to me, in my experience, I've done lots of research on social impact, economic impact in Italy, working with libraries, with theaters and with museums, and if you are referring to output, you can create standard routine that cultural institutions can have and produce, and that are able to detect how things are changed. But when we are talking about transformative processes, transformative needs to deal with outcome more than output. And in this case, it is much more difficult to deal with outcome, because you need to take time, you need to have the proper methodologies. Normally you have to have allies, like research center, university, that help you to develop this kind of study. And in many cases, you find you can get money from a specific research that is standalone, extraordinary. It lasts 1 year, and then for 5 years, nothing happens. And this, to me, is not the right approach, because you have light in a specific moment, in a specific perimeter, but you still remain in the dark for the rest. And to me, probably, is not to reach the best, but try to find the balance on an average, routines and standard that allows you to see what is important to see. Even though you don't reach the highest point, but you are able to say, okay, these are my objectives, this is my mission, these are the kind of transformative process that were to carry out, and what are the resources, what are the indicators, and I am able to do that.
Like an effective low-key approach.
Low-key approach, yeah.
Yeah, great. On that point, exactly, the transformative process, beyond the first phase of the economic impact analysis, more focused, as we know, on the direct effects with evidence-based financial expressions. Don't you think that this type of social impacts, think of in a holistic way, can also encompass or be related also to justify and explain ourselves to non-cultural organizations, right? The economic values in a broader sense actually coming or deriving from the analysis of mostly indirect and induced effects rather than the direct ones, that can even come from the intrinsic values of the non-use of institutions in the cultural sector.
Yeah. But in general, as you said, for many organizations, the evaluation aspect is not just related to your internal knowledge, but it's just a process of advocacy. You need to advocate and to demonstrate your relevance. In the 80s, for example, the idea was that culture was part of the economy, can contribute to economy, so all the methodologies were focused on how to demonstrate that your, for example, it is quite paradoxically, in Italy we have a festival for the promotion of books. And when I went to the manager, they asked me to evaluate the impact effect of this festival in terms of hotel, direct spending, indirect spending, and nobody asked me, what are the effects in terms of reading, in terms of literacy, in terms of transformation? Because you are creating a festival of books or literature. You are not doing that for, okay, is an indirect and side effect this positively, you have to stress this side effect, but the intrinsic value is that you are doing this because you want people to read. This is the point. And that's why, for example, in the 90s, you remember in UK, when the first Labour government, the key words were education, education, education. And of course, the need for advocacy were those able to demonstrate that even libraries, archives, museums were in the stream to produce side effects, indirect effects, where education, civic transformation, and social cohesion were the key points. And now probably, as I said, we are moving toward a much more mature idea of multi-dimensional aspect, because in the narrative that we have to use, we have to advocate for the fact that culture, as I said, is at the intersection of different sectors. And now policies are interested to see how to project new cultural centers. In Italy, we are talking about hybrid space. Hybrid space are libraries, archives, museums, cultural centers that are conceived together, because the hybrid idea allows this capacity to be a platform, connecting dots and creating bridges among the different sectors. So in this case, the advocacy is not just to the cultural area, but dealing with the Minister of Education, the Minister of Urban Regeneration, policy transformation, and so on.
And within the multidimensional approach, you stressed very much in the beginning and also until the end, the importance of participation, right? It's like a key point, turning point. And you focused on a wider and more articulated participation and as a key element to positive effects, generally speaking. When correlated to cultural practice, of course, which is for us professionals of the cultural sector something very natural or even evident. Could you further explain very briefly how the participation concept is important to the civic wealth creation and its connection to the positive social exchange, which is something, well, keywords that are relevant for current national and also international policies and economical strategies?
Okay. We have to think that we are living in a period of increasing disequalities, and this is, to me, is very important. After the COVID in Italy, but in Europe, there's a situation where social differences, economic differences, and cultural differences and technological divide are strictly intertwined and interconnected. So the role of the culture is to mitigate, to me, the effects of these inequalities. And that's why participation can become a political action if institutions are able to enlarge the social base. Otherwise, what is the risk? The risk is that if the narration and the theory is correct, that cultural participation is correlated positively with well-being, growth, competitiveness, but this cultural participation is limited, narrow only to a small social perimeter. The risk is that cultural system create not an inclusive society, but contribute to make the things worse, creating a society where all the people have cognitive, economic, social tools and resources for dealing with the complexity, and the rest of the population has no possibility to deal with the complexity. And that's why, and it's not just a rhetoric, it's the political vision that many countries have decided to have, is to find, mitigating the differences as one of the key issue in the political, also for the participation.
Thank you very much. I think mitigating inequalities would be a very good way to stop this part of the session. So thank you again very much, Alessandro Bollo.
Obrigado.
I already explained, Alessandro, what Bollo means in Portuguese. You didn't know.
It's fine.
And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Convido-vos agora a uma pequena pausa para um café.
At 11:15.
Exato, tem bolo. Talvez tenha bolo. Tentem com a brevidade possível. Vamos dar início à segunda parte da manhã.
Let's resume our session now with a much expected part. We all want to know what CISOC is, Commitment of Social Impact in Cultural Organizations, a measure of PNA. It will be presented by Clara Camacho, a museologist from the National Plan for the Arts, and she's the coordinator of this project, and Maria Fernandes from the technical team, Flora Maravalhas, a PhD in Public Policies in the University of Lisbon, and José Soares Neves, an integrated researcher of Iscte and director of the Portuguese Observatory for Cultural Activities. Clara, you have the floor representing the team, the CISOC team. Please be as silent as possible.
Pela sua intervenção.
Bom dia.
Good morning.
Bom dia
Good morning.
a todas e a todos.
Good morning to you all. I'm very happy to be here today in
Tão repleto
this hall
de muitas caras
with so many
que vieram
familiar faces, people from all over the
diversificadas
country, from different
para
organizations,
esta jornada de trabalho
to participate in this event about social impact, and more concretely, now in this second part of the morning, the commitment of social impact of cultural organizations, that, as it has been said in the opening session by the National Arts Plan Commissioner, it is a public policy measure under the National Plan for the Arts. And that is, or it is in this perspective that I will make my presentation. And allow me first to thank the team that I coordinated in these past 2 years, Maria Fernandes from PNA, Flora Maravalhas, the PhDs, and PhD student, and also with support of José Soares Neves from Iscte. So, this presentation will follow in its structure, also the structure of the publication we will make available today, which contains the basis, methodology, and support mechanisms for this tool, this management tool that we will talk about in the next 30 minutes. So, first, what was the path that we followed? What was the process, the construction process of CISOC? I will this acronym from now on, which is shorter, it saves time instead of saying everything, CISOC. So, starting from the beginning, what was the starting point? The starting point was, and as it has already been mentioned, the insertion in the National Strategic Plan for the Arts 2019-2024 of a measure, at the time was called the Social Impact Contract for Cultural Organizations, that then the name was changed to Commitment, and maybe this axis of cultural policy is not so well known to those that follow PNA's activity, but it starts, it begins being structured, and this year the municipal strategic plans for culture and communication have been launched, coordinated by Manuel Gama. He's actually one of the speakers in the next panel, and with the presentation of CISOC, we are
este eixo da política cultural.
bringing about this axis of cultural policy.
Como é que começámos a
How
desenhar
have we
esta
started to
O
elaborate this
CISOC
measure?
inscreve-se em termos
CISOC,
de processo e de
in terms of
metodologia,
process
na
and
teoria da
methodology, is
ação,
part of the
adaptada
theory of
a este
action
caso.
adapted
Portanto,
to this case.
naturalmente,
So,
partimos de conjunto de
we
necessidades
stem from
que,
a
a
set
partir de informação
of needs
pública,
that then,
relatórios,
based on
diagnósticos,
public
planos de
information,
atividade,
reports, diagnosis,
sites
plans of
institucionais,
activities,
inquéritos,
institutional websites,
eh,
surveys,
documentação,
and
grey literature, como se
the
diz,
so-called
nos académicos,
grey literature
fomos encontrando
that we found, and so we
elenco
comprised the listing of what we consider to be the most important common needs to Portuguese cultural institutions. So we think that there is a lack of involvement in promoting cultural citizenship, understood as the exercise of rights, cultural rights and duties enshrined in the Portuguese Constitution, in greater, closer relationship with audiences and people. The relationship with schools and cultural organizations must be strengthened and more integrated and systematized, and we need long-term strategies, evidence-based strategies, and we have to build the capacity of the teams. So this was the starting point, and then we started to prepare to draft a proposal that went through different stages until today. Today we have the commitment and its public presentation. But it all started with a reflection stage, then literature research, on field research based on each organization's experience. Because at first we had this huge challenge. It's the very designation of this commitment, the fact that it is aimed at all types of cultural organizations. This was the challenge at the outset, trying not to think about silos in culture, trying not to think about museums only, or libraries only, or theaters, cultural centers, but trying to take the most of what is being done in these organizations and finding organizational models that could provide an answer. I mean, the task wasn't easy because we do not have many international models that can respond to these needs, our needs from the outset. But it was at the time of this, when we were doing this research, that, for instance, we came to meet Alessandro Bollo, that we heard a while ago, because not many years ago the European Commission had commissioned a survey from a team that Alessandro was part of, and and that study was aimed at all types of cultural organizations. So that was a good starting point. And then we also took advantage of sectorial bibliographies. So we started to develop our first two documents, sort of what is this commitment, who are we targeting, what tools will be necessary to give support to our work. So what we call a CISOC toolkit. Then we had already drafted a roadmap, and we started to hear not so much organizations, but mainly people. This happened in the summer of 2022. These people read our documents, they made made comments, reviewed the documents, and then we adapted them. And at the same time, we were developing a set of indicators. We did not, even before the theoretical part was over, we started to test these indicators on the field. So from August 2022 to March 2023, 2023, and I will elaborate on this further ahead. So we adapted our toolkit, we created new instruments, we validated them, we delivered in June 2023, and today we are officially presenting the commitment. The next stages, I hope they will start in January next year, and then you will hear from us. So what is this commitment of social impact of cultural organizations? It is, first and foremost, as the name commitment shows, an act of mutual accountability of the several ministries and cultural institutions. And the OECD guide ECOM was extremely important. It will be launched at the end of this conference, and it will be another supporting tool to our work, because this guide determines very clearly, and I must say this is rare in the literature, the responsibilities of the administrations and the responsibilities of the organizations. So this was an interesting model to us, and we adapted it to our situation. This commitment is a management tool, but also a planning and self-assessment tool. From the outset, it was clear to our team that we could not go forward. We could not go to an external evaluation tool because the conditions, the resources of Portuguese cultural associations would hardly meet these requirements. They don't have the means, they don't have to hire external teams. So at the first moment, we thought it to be more practical and useful to recommend a self-assessment tool. Nevertheless, the way it is mentioned can still be used as an assessment tool. But at its origins, we have designed it to be a self-assessment tool, so for the teams may assess their own work and monitor their own work. For whom and with whom? Now, with everyone, I must say. All types of cultural organizations, museums, theatres, libraries, arts centres, contemporary arts centres, and all type of administrative governmental institutions, the central and local level, private sector, state-owned enterprises, the so-called third sector. We believe that this tool can be adapted to any type of organization, and we can only put it into practice with the people, with those teams that work for these institutions, regardless of their role in those institutions, whether they are managers, mediators, educators, officers, librarians, museologists, producers, whatever. We think that we should involve everyone, and this slide you can see on the back is like it's a perspective slide. It shows us what the future scenario, when it is implemented, we will have the possibility to ensure networking involving all these institutions. This is a possibility for the future. Now, studies and influences were many and determinant. During this period, while we were preparing CISOC, we had the Porto Santo letter as a reference, one of the key elements in the national plan for the arts at European level as well. And so we used the bibliography that, as I told you in the beginning, could provide a better response to our needs, be them projects like the one that is coordinated in Portugal by Inês Câmara, or the European Union study that I mentioned, social barometer of museums of Catalonia, that we will have a presentation by Sonia Blasco this afternoon, some national projects, study projects, and so all these were the basis for what we eventually built. Now, in the third part of my presentation, which comprises the core of our methodology, and what you can see on the slide is the table of contents of the roadmap. The roadmap is then replicated in a legal document called Charter of Principles. But since I don't have the time to elaborate on the guiding principles and their framework, I will just focus on the practical part of the roadmap, which contains the methodology that we are proposing, starting with strategic objectives and self-diagnosis. Our methodology is structured around 3 strategic objectives: keeping and increasing audiences as cultural active agents, I mean those that already participate in the actions developed by cultural organizations. We want them to participate more and to come back, but we also want to, and this is strategic objective B, common to all organizations, I'm sure, but but this is one that cultural organizations are much more concerned about. This is involving new publics, new audiences that otherwise would not come spontaneously, and this is a long-term effort. And certainly we want to diversify our audiences and involve those that, be it for economic reasons or for lack of interest, do not usually participate. And finally, Objective C, strengthen education responsibility and to strengthen the connection between schools and cultural institutions. Now, we can see there on the slide the definition of audiences that we embrace with this commitment, and it is important to understand it and so as to avoid creating false dichotomies, which was not our intention. So audiences or publics are active cultural agents in our perspective, and this word may have different meanings, like attendees, users, spectators, visitors, participants. That is actually the word that we will then use more regularly when we talk about data and indicators. And the first step of this methodology that we propose, and this is something that already happens informally in most of our organizations, is precisely to start with the self-diagnosis. In order to do this self-diagnosis in this roadmap, we propose several questions, and these questions are or correspond to each one of the strategic objectives, but I don't have the time to show you all those questions. I have chosen just a few from the diversification and involvement of new audiences objective. And the organization itself has to understand what information is there available today about the community where the organization is included, what are the cultural practices of this community, what has been done in the past to involve groups and people that are not frequent users and nevertheless have been successful. What can we do? Can we learn from errors and failures? And then the main question, very practical and objective question: what target audiences do we want to involve in this commitment? So the matrix for this methodology
do levantamento das necessidades.
Starts with the survey of needs, and then we come to 3 strategic objectives, which unfold in 8 operational objectives and 24 impacts. The evaluation is both quantitative and qualitative, and from these impacts we were able to draw 110 indicators. It is quite a menu that is available to anyone who wishes to use it, and our suggestion is that each organization chooses from this menu, from this list, a number. It can be 18, 24, or maybe even less than that, depending on the scale, objectives, and needs of your organization. As I said, the 3 strategic objectives unfold into 8 operational objectives. Our methodology will always follow, as you will see in this sequence, strategic, operational, impacts and indicators. And throughout the publication, I hope you can see that it is relatively easy to navigate along these different parameters. For instance, when we consider some operational objectives in the strategic objective B. I'm focusing on this objective because the diversification of audiences is very important, and each organization will have its own self-diagnosis already done, and they have an idea about which audiences they want to reach in their community or in a broader territorial scope. But what we want to bring here mainly is this densification of impacts, because until recently, because of the existing management tools, for instance in the public administration at central and local level, sometimes we set objectives, set indicators, but we are not very much aware of the impact that we want to attain. And we try to give a hand with this script, more access opportunities, more online participants, increasing the network of planifications at local level, and so forth. So now the indicators. The baseline to build these 110 indicators was an international database compiled by John Jacobson, an American researcher. He built a base with more than 1,000 indicators. They can be found on the Ohio Institute website, and then using this as an international base, as a background, then we step by step came to what ended up being the possible indicators in Portugal. It's very clear to us that what we are building, what we are offering you, are the indicators, are those indicators that have credibility, that can be applied, that have validity, they have relevance. These were the selection criteria. In many cases, the lack of reliable sources and the lack of available public information curtailed certain indicators, maybe more interesting, but that we could not integrate here. So they correspond to these 5 criteria, the indicators that we have chosen, and from then on we went on with the selection, and the selection then had to be fine-tuned, and this was very important. On the field tests, for instance, still back to strategic objective B and operational objective to extend the access opportunities and increase participation of segments of population that were not so well represented. We came up with a set of indicators, representative indicators. What I'm showing, what I'm telling, it's always excerpts. This is to give you an idea about what this tool makes available. And then we also took care to integrate qualitative indicators, as I told you a while ago. It was a somewhat difficult task because it is rare and it is difficult to find in the international bibliography examples of qualitative indicators that are appropriate to the Portuguese reality. Most of them were created by our own team. Here we have other examples of indicators within strategic objective B, and also C, of course, strengthen the education and responsibilities. I mean, those that are the most basic ones, annual variation in schools, classes, teachers. So those elements that are usually collected at the schools, institutions, and adding to this some qualitative indicators. But this is just a part of a much broader set of data. Now, the fourth part of my presentation, supporting tools or instruments. As we proceeded and as our work became more complex, we realized that it was absolutely essential to have necessary instruments that help us implement this methodology. So we created an operationalization guide. What you can see projected is a flowchart with the different stages of this guide, and the main actions in each stage, starting with preparation, all the way through to session and final evaluation. This map, I know this chart, I know no one can read it on the floor, but the idea was just to show it to you, so that you know that it exists. So the guide does have a table with all stages that the organization should go through. And let me give you an example. In the first two stages, preparation and accession, where we have the actions, who's responsible for what, time dimension, when, some observations, supporting tools that can be found in CISOC's website, and it all starts with the reading and an approach to this publication that can be, you can follow each chapter at a time or the whole in the website. And then the accession to the commitment through a protocol and to the agreement letter. This protocol, I believe, will guide those that accede to this commitment. It will be like a compass that one can use to guide us and not lose track of where we are going to. Another important supporting tool that we felt the need for is a notebook of supporting fishes to the indicators. The indicators are not complex. The indicators we have chosen are quite simple, quite basic. They are indicators, very simple, as I said, with variations, percentages, in the case of averages, in the case of quantitative indicators, that is. But for each indicator, we felt the need to create a fish, and who chooses an indicator should then go straight to that fish, that form, in the notebook, and it follows, the fish follows parameters that are always the same in the case of quantitative indicators, and also identical in the case of qualitative indicators. We provide basic explanations, for instance, about the calculation method, even when it is quite obvious. And so we took care to try to include all of them as much as possible. And besides, when we heard the cultural organizations and when we tested this instrument in the cultural organizations, we found that a lot of people were not literate in statistical terms, and there are also some data that have not been treated, data available that have not been statistically treated. Another example of a fish in this notebook for indicators. In this case, a qualitative indicator that we pay much attention to in the development plan, which is the involvement of the audiences, the engagement of the audience. We'd like to see this implemented in the Portuguese cultural associations and to provide some support too. And now a few other examples of fishes in the strategic objective C, strengthening educational responsibility. Well then, when we were almost done with our notebook of fishes, we thought about another tool, a supporting tool that was the result of our visits to the organizations. It is a computer app that helps calculating the indicators. Well, in practice, it is an Excel table where all indicators have been inserted with their formulas in the case of quantitative indicators, but it also includes qualitative indicators. Then, when you open the table, there is an index or a list of impacts, and it's important following our methodology that this is where we think that the road should go through, the impact that we want it to have, and by selecting the impact, we can come immediately to the corresponding indicators to that impact. We made here an example selection, a sample. Imagine a theater with a given number of participants and spectators and other between 2022 and 2023 through a ticketing system, because there can be other types of methods to calculate these numbers. I will show you. But anyway, in this case, with the tickets, we were able to get to the final result, the final table, which will be automatically filled in. In this case, with this indicator, and also within the qualitative indicator that I will show in a moment, and that is the audience engagement development plan, imagining that the organization doesn't have one. So it would say not done, but they may plan when they want to draft this plan. Another example from the over 60 population segment. What is the percentage of participants that are over 60 vis-à-vis the total participants? And here you can see that the calculation method does not necessarily have to be the tickets. It can be an estimate, or probably a less fine-tuned system. And just one example, if we are working and if we go to a given age segment, youngsters or those over 60, whatever, throughout this list of indicators, we'll find many diversified indicators regarding that segment. Even among those that are over 50, what I'm projecting here are just excerpts. There are other indicators aimed at this trait age group. So, with a tool that was growing and gaining more dimensions, we thought a glossary was very important. Glossary for statistical terms, but also for the keywords in this commitment. Here we can see a part of the table of contents of the glossary and the definitions. Again, just a few examples, and just like with all glossaries, we included definitions that we took from other dictionaries, We tried to use more Portuguese glossaries and foreign glossaries, but we ended up using both. So in one case and the other, these are terms that were created that make sense and that CISOC decided to welcome. We also provide reading suggestions throughout the way, be it in the fishes of indicators or in the CISOC initial document, in a specific mode with reading suggestions. Finally, we also prepared legal drafts that are available online, legal forms, for one to access this commitment, an agreement letter, protocol agreement letter, this or access letter. This has to do with the type of status of the organizations. If they are autonomous, they can celebrate this agreement with the National Plan for the Arts. If they are not autonomous or independent, then it will have to be the institutions that govern them. And it is from this moment onwards that the cultural organization starts what we call the development project of the commitment. This development project of the commitment that we showed a moment ago, now it was on the slide that I did not elaborate on that. So that's the period that goes from 6 to 9 months, that depending on the needs raised and strategic objectives, operational indicators, impacts, depending on all that, the organization will develop a project that will be then approved by the minister, if that's the case.
Finalmente, como em todas as situações em que se apresenta algo de novo, surgem muitas perguntas e eu acredito que neste momento e nesta sala também haja muitas dúvidas e perguntas. Nós tentamos também ajudar com esse módulo das perguntas frequentes. E enfim, as que estão aqui selecionadas dão já conta, por exemplo, das obrigações do Plano Nacional das Artes, quando celebra este compromisso inicial, o que é que nós podemos dar, além do que fica hoje online, consultoria, apoio, capacitação. Adiantei-me, e antes que surgisse a pergunta se havia um pacote financeiro associado a este kit, pois não, da parte do Plano Nacional das Artes não há, mas há todos estes apoios que acabo de vos referir e poderá certamente haver apoios financeiros por parte ou das próprias entidades envolvidas, ou de stakeholders, ou de outras organizações que tenham interesse no desenvolvimento deste tipo de instrumentos. Porque estes instrumentos, como o Alessandro referiu na sua conferência inaugural, vêm ajudar a demonstrar e a frisar a relevância das organizações. E isso é muito importante. Então, agora mesmo, já quase a terminar, também temos hoje o gosto de apresentar o site onde fica esta informação disponível. Aquilo que estão a ver é o menu de abertura do site, que ficará disponível, creio que pela hora de almoço, é a expectativa, pelo menos que tenho neste momento. Os menus, é um site muito simples e com os menus base de apresentação, com o mais relevante, creio eu, que é no kit CISOC a possibilidade de descarregar ou a publicação total ou os seus capítulos, que correspondem aos vários módulos que fui aqui apresentando. E, enfim, e de alguma maneira, com esta etapa do nosso lado, cumprimos aquilo a que nos tínhamos comprometido.
And this is how we want to meet our demands.
Expressar o meu agradecimento
I would like to
a muitas pessoas
express
e a
my
muitas
thanks
organizações.
to many people, many bodies.
Em primeiro lugar, aos comissários do Plano
Firstly,
Nacional das
the
Artes,
commissioners of the National Plan for the
confiaram
Arts,
a esta equipa
who entrusted this team with this challenge.
Tenho a impressão que não estava, enfim, tão perspectivado de início que teria a complexidade que acabou por ter. Agradeço imenso a confiança que foi
I
depositada
want to
nesta
thank you for
equipa,
trusting
aos
this
colegas
team.
da DGPC,
I'd like to thank all the colleagues in the GPC.
nas minutas jurídicas,
They helped
o Serra e o Artur Fumero,
setting up all the legal background,
a todas as pessoas que na primeira fase,
etc. And I'd like to thank all the people who in this. I cannot read through all of these names, but I'd like to thank all the people who produced the documents, reviewed them, the people from the National Plan for the Arts, all the people who went time and time again over the C module, educational responsibility. My thanks go out to you. And finally, an even bigger thanks to all 34 cultural organizations and bodies who welcomed us, sometimes more than once, more than one visit, more than one meeting. They gave up a lot of their time, usually a full morning or afternoon, and they would produce comments, suggest things. They would show how some of the elements were inconsistent or consistent, and they opened their doors to us to allow us to better understand the way they functioned. We tried to diversify
as filiações administrativas, a localização
all
geográfica.
these types and locations and types of entities. The commissioners know that if we'd had more time, we would have gone to other places, we would have gone to the Portuguese hinterland. But this is what we could do, so I'd like to thank you from the bottom of my heart. From now on, what I expect is everyone's commitment. Thank you.
Obrigada, Clara, pela apresentação e
Thank you,
detalhe
Clara,
do
for this
CISOC.
presentation.
Chamo agora ao palco
I'd like to
para o
invite
debate,
to the stage
olhares externos
for
sobre
the
o CISOC,
discussion
a Inês Câmara, diretora
Inês
da Mapa das
Câmara,
Ideias, que irá moderar,
Head of Mapa das Ideias, Catarina Vaz Pinto,
para a Cultura e as Artes, Maria
Consultant
Assis,
for Culture and
diretora
Arts,
adjunta do programa
Maria
Gulbenkian
Assis,
da Fundação Carlos Gulbenkian, e Manuel Gama,
and Manuel Gama,
integrado do SEX,
a researcher for CS, University of Minho, and coordinator of the Observatory for Policies for Communication and Culture.
Haverá uma fase de moderação e, portanto, poderão, como já
After
disse
this
antes,
debate,
participar a partir da audiência ou a partir do
You
chat, quem está a ver em streaming.
may participate through the chat if you're online or in the room.
Olá, bom dia. Vamos
Good morning, everyone.
passar à fase dos olhares externos. Vai ser um bocadinho mais curto do que nós tínhamos previsto.
We will be here just slightly
E a
less
ideia é
time
fazer uma
than
pequena conversa
foreseen
com o
this,
objetivo principal é que nós terminemos a nossa conversa mais íntima,
and this will
que
be
neste momento passou de ser
a more
um
intimate
debate a
conversation.
ser aquele momento de conversa quando passei ao cão
won't
e
be
encontramos amigos na rua.
a debate as much as it'll be like running into someone while walking your dog.
A abrir a discussão,
We want to open this discussion to the remaining of the room at 12:30. I'm sure everyone here will have something to say. This has been a very full and rich morning.
E uma das coisas que eu mais gostei
One of the
nesta
things
manhã
that I
foi a
liked
transparência
most
do
this
processo, foi a
morning was
explicação
how
muito
transparent
detalhada
this
de como
was.
é que se pensou o
We had a
processo.
very detailed
Como, de certa
explanation
forma, sentimos
on
cada vez mais
how this
ao
process
longo
went,
desta viagem, como as pessoas estão no centro das organizações.
and
E eu passava já a palavra aqui à Maria.
we got to
Como
meet,
nisso diz, porque
or I feel like we got to meet so many people. I'd like to talk to Maria and ask her, why is this instrument so important right now? And I'd like to invite my partners in crime to speak as well, interrupt, etc. But first I'd like to direct a question at Maria. He talked about the evolving role of cultural entities and the challenges they have.
Eu acho que nós estamos a viver momento
I think
bastante desafiante.
we're going through very challenging times.
É de facto chamada, como o Alessandro disse,
Culture, like Alexander said, is called upon to play multiple roles,
e de facto esta dimensão social
and the social and educational dimension of cultural entities and organizations is something that has been with us for some time now.
muito protagonizada por aquilo que são as equipas de mediação das organizações culturais.
There are the mediation teams in cultural organizations,
Teatros,
and they embody this.
também equipas de mediação.
There are mediation teams who work in community engagement. This is all very important because we want to create a system for ideas. One of the things that Clara couldn't mention, but I think you should go into this very attentively. I think you should read through this.
Quer dizer, uma visão para este momento com conjunto de princípios.
There is a vision with a number of guiding principles.
Bastante claros, muito fundamentais.
They need to be very clear.
Em documentos de referência a nível internacional.
They need well grounded in whatever work happens in Portugal and abroad. And in the end,
quase que programa. Programa que
the goal is to come up with a program that, if we're committed, we can develop. And it's very clear that for everyone and anyone who's thinking seriously about these issues, this can be a very useful reference to progress.
Esta ideia que o Paulo também falava dos inícios, não é? Que é a ideia de passar do pensamento ou de uma necessidade de uma ação.
Catarina, the idea of transitioning from thought into action is crucial, don't you think?
Bom dia. Eu queria começar realmente por felicitar
I'd like to start out by
este documento e
saluting
PNA por este
all
esforço que já foi aqui
those who
também
authored this
salientado no
document
fundo
and the
de
National
começar por
Plan for
algum
the
lado
Arts.
e na
There's a
verdade
need to start somewhere.
responsabilidades políticas, quer ao nível
I've already
do governo,
been
quer
on
mais
the policy
recentemente na
side with the
Câmara,
government and more recently
foi uma
in a municipality. We have always
muito grande que
shown
também tive, mas
a lot of concern. I've always shown a lot of concern,
e
but
também
these
trabalhar
things
há
take
de facto um
time,
déficit enorme
and
no nosso país de haver
there's a
este tipo de
huge
documentos estruturados sobre
lack
como intervir,
of structured documents, how to act,
como definir impactos, indicadores,
how
portanto,
to
este trabalho
define
estruturado
their impact,
é de uma enorme
indicators,
importância
etc.
e eu
So all of this is very important, and I'd like to
felicito-vos por isso e porque realmente também é uma forma,
greet
no
and
fundo, eles
thank and
acabam por
salute
ser,
everyone,
para mim
because
sempre foi importante esta
it's
ideia
always been important to me
qualificar a
to
governação
have an
da cultura, é
idea
um nome um bocado
to
pomposo, mas, na
qualify
verdade,
the type of governance we have in culture.
Num lugar político é no fundo esse o objetivo e para qualificar
And
nós
in
também
order to
precisamos ter
qualify, we need to have instruments, tools,
instrumentos que por um lado não só qualificam
and these
as
are the instruments that qualify
qualificam a ação
organizations,
e
they
qualificam as
qualify
próprias pessoas
action,
que nelas trabalham.
and
Portanto,
the
no fundo,
people who work
estes
there.
documentos acabam por ser indutores de mudança.
So these documents
muito importantes.
themselves
E, nesse
are
sentido,
catalysts for change.
acho que nunca é assim. pecam por tardios.
And I
Há
think
sempre,
this
tem
is
que
very
começar de
late in
alguma forma,
coming.
mas já também o
We
próprio
need to start
PNA
somewhere, but the
também o
National Plan
esforço
for the Arts
que tem tido no
and
sentido
all the effort
de
surrounding it,
promover a implementação, por
the
exemplo, de
idea
planos,
that we have
planos
to
estratégicos
promote
municipais,
municipal
que também,
strategic
por exemplo,
plans.
quando nós criámos, também estive envolvida no programa da Arte em Rede,
I
também
also
foi
helped
uma
draft
preocupação que
the
tivemos na altura, também fizemos
Art
dia,
Network.
o que era um teatro municipal,
We
o que era
drafted a
o que
guide
era a
of what,
missão. Portanto,
what it
todo
meant
esse
to
tipo
be a
de
municipal
instrumentos
theatre.
são muitíssimo importantes para
All of these
qualificar
documents are
a
important in
governação da cultura,
qualifying
que, na verdade, acaba no
the
nosso
governance
país ainda por ser
culture. And
considerada
in our
uma
country,
área
in
bastante
Portugal, this field
desvalorizada relativamente
is
às outras
still,
políticas.
E a passarmos
still
um bocadinho, e também passarmos um
seen
bocadinho daquele
as
sítio da
a-
crença, de uma ideia para ter uma base, um
as an
fundamento.
Sim, claro, é
unprivileged
assim,
area.
temos que
Yes, we
transformar as
have
nossas
to
ideias em palavras
turn our
e instrumentos
ideas
de ação. E, na verdade,
into words
os planos, os documentos, os documentos estratégicos,
actions,
os planos,
all
estes
these plans,
passam
strategic documents,
por esse
etc.,
tipo de coisas, este tipo de compromisso. Às vezes até penso que
have
este
to
compromisso em
do with
si
commitment.
é uma das
This commitment
das reflexões que me suscitou, se não é mais do que um compromisso de
is
impacto,
sometimes
se ele
little
próprio
more
já
than
não é
a
também quase que
commitment to
documento
make an
estratégico,
impact.
e pergunto-me,
It
que é
can be
também
a
uma
strategic
questão que o
document.
próprio Alessandro hoje também levantou, como é que este documento, o compromisso de impacto,
And
está
this
relacionado com os planos
commitment
estratégicos
to
das
impact, how does
organizações,
it relate
se é
to
que elas
the
existem, porque eu também
organization's
duvido
strategic
aqui
plans? If
que
there are
a
some,
maior
because
parte
sometimes
das organizações, pelo menos as do
I
sistema
would
público, têm planos de
think
atividades,
that
mas
some
não
of
sei se
the
têm planos
public bodies have activity plans, but I
desafio
doubt that they have
para o
strategic
PNA,
plans.
ou não só para o
So
PNA, para o
I'd
próprio
like
Ministério da
to
Cultura,
challenge the
de-
Ministry of
no
Culture
fundo,
or the
implementar
NPA
aquilo que propôs a
produce
própria universidade, não é? Trabalhar
or
este
to
tipo
lead them
de
to
projeto, assim
draft
como,
strategic
como se
plans.
trabalhou na ideia de tentar que todas as câmaras tivessem um plano estratégico
We
na área da
tried
cultura e da
for
educação,
every
é
municipality to have a
fundamental que toda
strategic
organização
plan for
cultural
cultural
tenha
and
conjunto
culture and
de
education,
documentos
but we also like every
claramente
organization to have a number
estratégico que define a nossa missão, os objetivos,
bases,
os meios
and one of them should be a strategic plan because that's where you draft, where you establish the goals, the means to reach them, what each body should do.
que
This
também
is
na
a
Câmara nós
concept,
tentamos
conceptual
de
framework
alguma forma,
that we tried in
implementar.
our
A outra
municipality
coisa que eu queria dizer, que é também o que eu acho muito importante
to implement. Something else I'd like to say,
do foco das
it's
organizações para
the
as
fact
pessoas,
that
porque isso, na
they're
verdade,
turning the focus
corresponde
from
à
the
evolução
organizations to the
das
people.
organizações culturais, que o próprio
There's been an
Alessandro
evolution
frisou,
in
no fundo,
cultural
que
organizations, and
na
Alessandro
área da
stressed
cultura, eu
that.
até acho que foram as bibliotecas que começaram esse processo.
I
já há
think
muitos
libraries
anos.
started
Bibliotecas
this process.
internacionais, nós
International
também tentámos, de alguma
libraries.
colocar-nos no mesmo
In a
patamar, ou
way,
seja, há
we
um lema
tried
que é as
to
pessoas fazem as bibliotecas, isso é um lema que as
establish
bibliotecas
here a
internacionais já
level playing
têm há
field.
imenso tempo que nós adotámos.
Libraries are
as
made out of
bibliotecas de
people,
Lisboa,
and
mas,
we
na
adopted
verdade,
that motto
tem a ver
into
com
the
esta
Lisbon
esta
libraries.
evolução das organizações e do lugar
But this
da
has to
cultura
do
nas
with
sociedades,
the way organizations evolve and the role that culture plays in society.
estarem ao serviço das pessoas.
Cultural policies need to service people.
E as pessoas serem o centro, a ideia da democracia cultural, a ideia da participação, a ideia de como
We
a
need
cultura
the idea
afeta e está presente na
how
vida de cada um,
culture-
nas suas várias dimensões.
culture affects
como
everyone's
cultura
lives.
multidimensional, como passamos
And
deste paradigma vertical
The idea of moving
que é o
from a vertical to a horizontal model
que é muito bastante
is what we're trying to do.
há alguns anos, há algum tempo, e ainda não inventámos um outro modelo que é esse.
There's still another model that needs to be fleshed out, where all organizations participate.
Que é o modelo que o próprio paradigma digital, que é o paradigma de governação do presente, no fundo promove
E há esta lógica
But this
também
is the model that
das
is
organizações
promoted
que estão em
right now.
constante aprendizagem, não é? É bocadinho.
There's also the idea that the organizations are learning constantly. People are at the heart organizations.
Que às vezes até pode ser um bocadinho, poxa,
Sometimes the assessment could be improved, but it's an internal
Sim, portanto, faz parte disso, no fundo, quando este documento
learning
acaba por
model.
permitir
Yes, this
esse
document
constante,
fosters
processo de aprendizagem
this
permanente que é o
constant learning process.
Eu só queria também dizer só mais uma coisa em relação a este
I'd like to
documento,
say something.
que eu a certa altura achei que precisamente porque pressupõe e propõe essa ideia da aprendizagem ao longo da vida para
There's the idea of lifelong learning, but from vis-à-vis
esse papel
cultural
passa não
organizations,
apenas pela relação com a escola, e então eu acho que
there is
o documento está muito
a
centrado na
connection
relação com a
with
escola,
school, of course, but in this document focuses more with the relationship with school, but doesn't focus on other things that are just as important, indicators and the relationship of each organization with society in general. I understand this was drafted under the scope of the MPA, but if we look at cultural bodies, their education dimension goes beyond their link to school. So, Manel, how do you see this link to the indicators? Well, I'd like to congratulate you because I've been keeping up with this, and this is coming very late. We were privileged enough to read this document. We've talked about it, we've analyzed it, and there is this link to education, that's true. But this is a starting point to define strategy. And just now I was talking about the development of municipal plans for culture and education. We defend that the strategic municipal plans are documents for cultural policy. They're linked to education, but let's not think about all the other aspects. These indicators and the indicators that as of January will be placed before us, they privilege the link to schools, but also to other aspects. Another relevant aspect, which is, do cultural bodies have strategic plans? All the studies we've done show that most Portuguese municipalities do not have strategic plans. If the municipalities have no strategic plans for culture, then cultural bodies don't either. And it's important to see why not, and why are we still requesting that there be across-the-board cultural policies if there is huge difficulty in developing medium-term goals in municipalities, in public cultural bodies, and if these two entities don't have a strategic vision, how can I ask of a body that is supported by the DG Art for 4 years only to draft a strategic plan? This is very difficult. And the indicators, the relationship between indicators and strategy, the indicators help us achieve this vision. And now let's turn our focus to the document. I'm the bad cop. Let me tell you straight away. Someone said this was a menu of indicators, 110 indicators, and this is all fine and good. But there's a lot of meat to it, but not enough fish. 94 indicators are quantitative ones, and 16 are qualitative ones. I understand that very often it's hard to develop qualitative indicators, but when we go to the glossary, the definition of target and result shows that there's some problems here. But the people who work in the cultural sector, like ourselves, must help create another type of indicators who will allow us to effectively claim the social impact of all this work. And that's why I think that, I don't know if this was the question, but we only have 8 minutes left, so I had to say this. I think it's very important to look at the indicators, and when we have to apply this instrument, as of January, when we start taking your document to draft strategic plans, what we'll think of when we try to help municipalities draft their strategic plans, we'll draft a huge number of indicators. I'm holding the one for Guimarães, and there's a huge number of indicators, and the thing we'll be talking about will be, can control access. No, I told you to shut up and you did. I'm very impressed. I think one of the things that CISOC shows us is that we can help. This is a management tool, but this will depend on the will of the managing authorities, but of each one. Because if we want strategies, with strategies we can help set up indicators. This works both ways. Indicators, qualitative ones, can be limited. Yes, I need tools to assess. An indicator is relevant because of the instrument that was used to create it. I can use a very complex qualitative indicator, but I need to have a very solid, very sturdy tool that allows me to assess the participation of citizens when linked to the volunteer work, but also in a wider scale. Or assess the quality of teaching and the quality. And you must assess the quality of teaching in several ways, from several viewpoints, and the impact it has on students, teachers, and school staff. So you have to acknowledge that it's a complex ecosystem. I'd like to stress just one thing. CISOC is a tool for strategic thought, but it doesn't include how to use it. But this is the first step to reflect on these issues and to look at these issues with a different type of awareness. I'm thinking we cannot look at quantitative and qualitative data separately. There's a link, and they talk to each other. You mentioned diagnosis. It's important to know what I'm doing, with whom, for whom, who are the people in each community. This is one of the steps that I think should be more developed in this process, that is the construction and development of CISOC. Because on the one side, you need to be aware of where you're getting that information, if that information is more automated or not, and we don't need empirical opinions. Then there's a whole sort of details that maybe we can't get there. One of the indicators is to count the variation in young people that visit somewhere. If the ticket office cannot separate between young people or senior people or professions, it's even more complicated. But if I can't separate, if I can't discriminate, segregate, then this won't help me further on. As for the qualitative aspect of quantitative data, through numbers,
Não é só crescimento
we
linear,
need to understand that there's
geral,
not just general linear growth.
das atividades. Eu posso estar a organizar uma série de atividades.
Let's say I'm setting up a number of activities for which there is no demand, and there's a lot of demand for others. So I need to segregate data and understand what makes it different, what the public wants. There's also something we've been talking about. Alessandro mentioned this.
Que é a questão do potencial transformador, porque
which is the idea of
as
transformative.
pessoas são transformadas por relações de continuidade.
Transformation, how transformative can something be?
Mais entidades com quem colaboro, ou que tenho cada vez mais escolas que vou
Working with more entities and with more school doesn't mean my work is better when it comes to the impact I have on people's lives.
Projetos de continuidade, sejam com a
We
comunidade,
need to have
sejam com
continuity
escolas,
projects
seja
with
com,
communities, with schools,
organizações ligadas à saúde,
with
são uma
health-related institutions. All of this work is very important, but we need to engage.
outro tipo
We need to
de indicadores, não é? No fim de contas,
use another type of indicators in order to measure something that is very complex and that is often left out, which is the intensity and the deepening of these relations. And there was something else I wanted to mention. The thing Manel said, 360 degrees. I cannot assess everything from the institution. I need to look at things from different standpoints. Different people, different bodies are key in these programs.
Que abrem a perspectiva e a leitura sobre aquilo que estamos a fazer. E, portanto, esse lado
and therefore, this aspect
instrumentos
will imply
escolha de informação mais sofisticados, que por sua vez
more and more sophisticated data with bigger and bigger teams. There's a need to work with academia. And then there's that issue, there's a light that focuses on something at a given time, but then away from that it's darkness. And these projects are very similar, and so we need to study different types of assessments for projects with similar characteristics in order to not go back to the drawing board. We don't want to go over things that we've already established. We need to move forward and reach public policy making in a way that is more consistent, because we keep going back to diagnosis. This is key, of course, but there's a point where we need to progress.
We'll now ask the team to come to stage. I will talk about ask Catarina, and that quotation by Charles Landry that Alessandro mentioned, and that also included the time factor, and I believe that this is also something that you consider in Lisbon, time for institutions to take their time to make decisions. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Questions may also be targeted external looks. Well, time in politics is always short, and
ao nível local, se calhar
At
há esse
local
privilégio
level,
de poder haver
there may be
mais longo
privilege of
na política ao
that we
nível
might
nacional.
have a longer time
Por exemplo, eu
in
tive
terms
12
of
anos na
national
Câmara
politics.
Municipal de
I
Lisboa.
spent 12
Acho
years
que o
at the
governo aguenta
municipality
12
of
anos.
Lisbon.
Mas
No
mais
government
uma
can
razão para a
stand
importância
that
destes
long,
documentos
but that's
técnicos,
another
porque
reason
o déficit,
for the
se calhar, da
importance of these technical
qualificação da
documents,
nossa
and that
própria
is
administração
why
pública,
our
quando
public
nós falamos de
administration
políticas públicas.
is not sufficiently
Políticas
qualified.
públicas
When
não
you
são
talk
só
about public policies, it is
os
not
titulares eleitos.
just
Políticas
the
públicas é
elected
todo o sistema da
officers, it's
administração
all
pública.
system of
E o
the
facto
elected officials. It's
de
all system
existirem
around
ou
it.
não
And the fact that we may have or not these documents that
uma
are
base partilhada de maneira de olhar
shared
para
way
os
of
problemas
looking at
e
problems and
nele intervir,
intervening in society,
é muito importante
it's
para
very
permitir
important to
que depois as ações e os efeitos, enfim, que possam ter uma continuidade
for these different actions to
e o impacto
be
que
followed on
quando
and
as
have an
ideias não estão
impact. When
estruturadas,
ideas
e acabam por estar dependentes
when
da
ideas are not
vontade popular, que não é
structured,
alicerçada,
these
na verdade,
may be decisions may be taken not that are not evidence-based, technical evidence-based, and that's fundamental to qualify public policies.
Acho
So
que esse é também o grande mérito da existência de documentos deste tipo, mérito e necessidade.
So this is the merit and the need for this type of projects. So I would ask the other colleagues, what did you think about this?
Então, em modo muito breve, para dar espaço às pessoas para
So briefly, to give room for people to intervene, I'd like to thank the three of you for this discussion, for your comments, honest and quite assertive. In many cases, it had already been discussed by our team. And I would just like to add the following. In my presentation, a lot was left to be said, and so two things that maybe complement what has now been said. First, this commitment that we are proposing is always will always be specific for each specific case, which entity. Maybe this was not clear from my words. So following the proposed methodology, each organization will take their own path in order to meet their self-diagnosis needs and taking into account the impacts that they want to achieve. So there is no equal recipe for all. I mean, there are suggestions, there are proposals, there is a framework, and let's call it a red line. So that is why we think this is a flexible tool that we develop as we go along, almost like a Lego construction. The second aspect, and I fully agree with that idea of the qualitative indicators, is the following. Maybe this was not clear, but I'd like to stress this. This measure was based on the PNA, National Plan for the Arts, and it was developed by a very small group of people in public administration, Amelia and myself. I was under contract with the GPC, and so with the good support of Flora, that decided to take CISOC as our PhD dissertation theme. So with all this, we have been able to prove that in public administration we can also develop instruments like these. I mean, we have talked about this before, and Katerina again stressed it. It's very important in the governance of culture to have master documents, guidelines that people can use in their day-to-day activity. And this is what we try to do with these few resources, but I wanted something to be useful,
e que os princípios orientadores...
And the guiding principles, I mentioned them just en passant, but this is all part of the cultural democracy principles that PNA has so much advocated for participation, etc. And I will not say anything else and let my colleagues complement. I just wanted to say that our first proof after this public presentation, after this debate, the presentations that will follow, I'd say that the proof will be our test, will be the interest, the interest that this instrument will raise with the cultural organizations. So we have prepared this publication. It's a kind of booklet that we want to be useful and easy to update. I mean, notwithstanding the fact that we'll always be there to support, to provide technical support that the instrument itself already has. Again, as regards the indicators, these were the ones we considered to be more relevant after having tested them with various cultural institutions, but it is not a closed list. As a matter of fact, we are working on certain modules. I mean, we started to work on certain modules that then we did not develop because of lack of time or basis, but it could have opened new paths. But I think what we have here already is a set of indicators that can be very useful to work with. And as Carla was saying, it is important to the organizations and it's important that they use these indicators but tailor in an adapted manner, tailored to their situation, and take into account their own times and commitments. Yes, and the other process already went well because now Melia, she has the experience on this side. Public administration trying to provide more or less innovative projects, so you were in the right place to provide this. And Flora as well. You also have an experience as a researcher in this area, although with a different reality. And José is probably one that has a more encompassing view about cultural policy in Portugal. Age can be an advantage sometimes.
Bom dia. Acho que eu vou voltar.
Good morning. Let me go back to qualitative indicators. I think it will be also something that will be mentioned quite a few times here. But remind you that at the beginning, all our bases were quantitative indicators, and it was along the process.
Porque os indicadores quantitativos, claro, há vários exemplos e
various types of quantitative indicators, we already had them, but the qualitative ones, we created them ourselves. And it wasn't easy because of a lack of additional parameters. In Brazil, we have worked with the Brazilian Museum Institute, and we never worked qualitative indicators before. So, I mean, it's like Maria Assis said, this is just a first step, and this first step is basic, more simple. The information are not collected yet. And so the change is slow, it happens on a gradual manner, and so it is for the indicators as well. So I'm not going to hide the need to speak about the indicators. I mean, this is a core issue, as you can see from our interventions. Everything has been very interesting. Everything has been said to clarify the various dimensions. But I suppose that the indicators is probably the most sensitive issue in terms of debate, at least. So, back to the quantitative and qualitative difference. In terms of academic and methodology terms, it's an endless debate. But the trend is an articulation between qualitative and quantitative types of approach. But we should never lose sight of the quantitative aspect, and this is the point. I like to quote a sociologist, Madureira Pinto, worked on cultural policies and local policies in Porto, and he said the following. Well, he advocates qualitative methods and approaches, but in his perspective, in terms of analysis, from quantitative to qualitative, in order to avoid the apostasy of the case. So what is this apostasy of the case? It's hyper-valuing the case. If we don't have the quantification, we tend to overvalue or undervalue the cultural organizations, and this is even more relevant. A lot of people have participated. But what do you mean by a lot of people? Is it the same thing to have an event for this audience or for 10 people? I'm not even counting those who are present here. So the impact in terms of organizations is very important in terms of management. And this difference between audiences and participants. There is an inclusive perspective, and you will see that in the document, which is the perspective of the PNA, and it is very important. It is not so much the public, not all participants, not so much the participants and the users, depending on the cultural institution that is at stake. It's the people. The people. That's what's important. The relationship with the people. Now, it is not the same having a relationship as an audience, as visitors, say 10,000, and in terms of artistic participation, 120 people. 10,000 in 1 year and 20 people in the same year. The important thing here is not the numbers, but planning, reflection, the goals we want to attain, the impacts. It is not the same to have 10,000 people in the facilities or 100 people participating in the activity. So these differences should be specified, they should be reflected, and they should be valued, and they should be understood, explained, translated in qualitative terms, of course. Because again, it is not the same to try to keep, say, the over 65 years old audiences, an example given. But one thing is to keep the flow to the cultural organization of the next number of people, because that's what is, that's the capacity. And then another thing is how can we improve our relationships with that group. This is a qualitative aspect that should be also considered. But again, the quantitative version should never be left out. So this is what I wanted to say. The hard reality, as Inês said in the cultural sector, just to give you one last example. The Ministry of Culture, since 2000, at the Observatory for Cultural Activities, we created a project called Statistics Database of the Ministry of Culture. There was a report that was produced, and the second report was produced. The second report, in its cover, had the words of the Minister of Culture saying that this should also be published according to the president of given institution. Now, 2023 already, and this has not been done yet. And the instruction was to formalize what we have in quantitative terms, the relationships with the visitors, users, etc. And if we do not have these instruments, then we cannot have a notion about the reality that we are dealing with, and how it evolves, and what comparisons can be made. Finally, another important dimension in terms of quantitative indicators, they allow for comparisons to be made, for a certain type of a summary, a synthesis, never losing sight of the quantification. It's very important, but we should never, again, as I said, left out the qualitative burden. Yes, all that is very important. I think Manuel wants to speak, but I would like to give the floor to the audience. Just 30 seconds. We can discuss this between the two of us later. But two things. The work is remarkable. Your work is remarkable. The work is remarkable. Fundamental. I mean, it should have happened a long time ago. Now, answering my friend, in order to explain the qualitative dimension, I have 16 indicators, and the quantitative indicator is 94 indicators. Do you see what I'm trying to get? I think it's very important to say that this is not a recipe. It is not a recipe. This is very important, because if the message does not pass that this is not a recipe, then you may look at this as something close, and it is not. Yes, what I felt is that it is a rather subversive document. I mean, it does very serious, let's say, clothing. It is a subversive document because it may get through the hierarchies and be used by everyone in our organizations. It can inform our work in our organizations. And so, with this little message, now I give the floor. I open the floor to the room. I'm sure there will be people willing to speak, and of course, they will have to use a microphone in order to be interpreted. And before speaking or before making your comments, please tell us who you are. Denise Polini. My question has two parts. The first part is a rather broad, almost philosophical sense. The second part concerns the document. So first I want to congratulate the team that prepared this document. It's extremely important. Now, the first part of my comment, a broader comment, as I said, I often, in my professional career, I have the idea that the cultural area has to surrender to a neoliberal logic when it dedicates too much to the quantitative parameters. So, a question to Manuel and to Maria da Cis. You made brilliant comments about this. Now, comes the second part of my question, and that's about the document. I feel that the cultural area needs to develop words to dialogue with public policies, because often in this neoliberal logic it requires the quantitative as a way of evaluation. And my question is, what sense does to what extent does the document help us develop this vocabulary, these words that can, I'm not sure if I'm making myself understood, but that can penetrate this logic, neoliberal logic, that is often very blind, very thick. Yes, that's very important, because I know that the glossary was not part of the first ideas, but they came from this idea to work on the with the words. Maybe we can, instead of answering right away, we take note of your questions and we'll listen to some other comments. But vocabulary, yes, very important. Thank you. Good morning, Marta Silva, among other things from the Social Cultural Cooperative. So it's not really a question, it's more like a wishful thinking. Well, first of all, thank you, congratulations for your work. It's always nice to see some of these things becoming reality, some of our theoretical discussions in order to prove impact in this case. Now, ironically, not in the last decade, but maybe before, we could only find in certain the social scope applications, not in the cultural scope applications. But now this seems to be brought to this field as well, which is good. My wish is, and based on Catarina's words, regarding the scope and the focus of the National Plan for the Arts, Education, Culture, etc., my wish is that maybe in the next 10 years we may have more occasions like this one, showing a partnership between culture and Ministry of Social Security, the Secretary of State of Migrations and Equalities, and with the Ministry of Territorial Cohesion, because we don't talk about cohesion and social impact in people in the center of our organizations. These are areas that cannot at all be left out of this work, and we are not there yet. And so this takes me to my question, and I apologize if I didn't read well. But I think that this instrument was developed based on the public organizations. And answer me. In the third sector, it was mentioned. For many years, the public culture organizations, for more years, the third sector has had a key role in the centrality of this, how they have been involved in this study, and how are you thinking about applying renovation, contamination of these indicators' impacts based on the third sector experience, which, in my opinion, and I'm talking about that because I work for it, it's a pioneer experimental, and for a decade has been developing a consistent work in the area. Thank you, Marta. Any more questions or comments from the floor? Well, while you take the microphone, let me read a question that arrived from our colleagues that are watching online. It's Rosa that asks the question. How the organizations that are with people that are in precarious work, precarious employment, do not have the time to acquire more competences, more skills, how can they respond to this challenge, which is to contribute to a greater cultural participation? The question is asked by Daniela Araújo. Yes, now you can ask your question. I will be very brief. I'm not representing anyone here, but I come from a local authority of a small town, Torres Vedras, north of Lisbon. And sometimes I feel, well, your name is Anna. Sometimes in the municipalities, smaller municipalities, away from the so-called central cities and with smaller organizations, sometimes we feel rather overwhelmed when we are facing these challenges. So, what I'd like to say is that this instrument can be an opportunity so that these territories, these organizations, as Catarina Vaz Pinto said, invest on the qualification of governance in culture. Because, quite frankly,
organizações culturais de pequena escala.
Small-scale cultural organizations will not have the capacity to own and reinvent this instrument if they don't get necessary cooperation and monetization. But this more overwhelming situation may incentivize this cooperation dynamics between cultural municipal equipment, between cultural and creative organizations, private or in the social economy that are present in those territories. And then to trigger this dialogues and making the best use of resources. Because an instrument like this requires skills, literacy that are not always available at local level. So there should be a collective pact, a collective agreement, a network, and that's what I wanted to say.
Eu ia propor à mesa começar a responder.
I will now give the floor back to the members of the panel to try to answer now. Combining this local dimension with the general issue that Denise asked about, it is interesting to note this, and I think this is one of the advantages of CISOC. Oh, at the end of the day, there is, I said at the beginning, there is already work being done, rather consistent work, towards this, in order to respond to these concerns. So there is this awareness already in the cultural organizations, and one of the things that this instrument allows, if it is followed by the several teams in an institution, is the possibility for the social impact not to be fenced in what we can call just the animation teams that have very particular concerns, totally divorced from what is a patriarchal institution, very much focused on their own narrative and just wanting to preserve power. Period. Now, one thing that Clara said, and that's very important when you think about the future and the challenges today, is the possibility to develop cooperation networks. So no longer think about institutions and their self-statement before their peers, and instead start to try to find common strategies, common objectives that will allow us to create complicities, complementarities, so as to meet the needs of the local communities. And therefore, and ultimately the common good. That's changing paradigm that we have to make. And sometimes someone will have to share power to do this. We have to stop being so self-centered and to think about the other side and do things in cooperation, in dialogue, but take it seriously, not just in words. And that's a problem. We just most times we just speak, but we don't walk the talk. Now, I was going to speak about institutions because it is the institutionalization. It's a complicated word, institutionalization. Well, maybe I can now start answering some of the questions, making some comments, and then share with my colleagues the answers. One of the questions raised by Denise, we understand that we are providing a contribution with our glossary to that vocabulary that we talked about. It is precisely because we felt that this was missing in documents, general purpose documents, and we therefore built this glossary or this vocabulary according to the guidelines of this commitment.
Vou dar aqui pequeno salto para a pergunta da Rosa.
Now, getting to Rosa's question. Well, actually, it was not Rosa, it was Daniela.
Que era, enfim, toca num ponto que eu
And
gostaria já
you touch upon something I wanted to mention before. And Anna also mentioned that, the local authority representative.
Então, faça isto.
So,
Como é que vai haver tempo? As organizações estão sempre de pauta.
Given all this, where can we find the time? The organizations lack resources, they lack the time,
Mais específico dos educadores,
namely educators, mediators. Now, our understanding
é claro que
is that
os momentos iniciais,
in the beginning,
reuniões de brainstorming,
when we have these brainstorming discussions, that takes time, but that time is already
aqui uma mudança de sistematização.
part of the plan of the institution. So it's just a matter of reorganizing things. I did not speak about transformation, but it is present. Maybe it's the most subversive part of CISOC. So there is an intention of transforming organizations, not so much time, but to use better that time. And this instrument will help elaborate and systematize a lot of what is already being done. And when we visited the 4 Portuguese cultural organizations, we got that idea. So in us answering Torres Vedras, a small town, when we applied the indicators tests, it was not, we didn't do it just in the largest cultural organizations that we found.
Interesse e práticas já no terreno relativas, por exemplo, à questão da diversificação.
Because in terms of diversification of audiences, there was already something being done by small-scale organizations. So that is not a decisive parameter. We were quite aware of that, and when we came to the end, we believe that what we have developed does cover different realities. Networking is fundamental, of course, and starting with the capacity building actions. Now, I don't know if one of my colleagues wishes to help answer. Now, the question asked by Marta is about the third sector. And so there was an evolution of our work. The measure was had been drafted for cultural organizations, culture, and in this process we expanded this universe, but we did not reach the third sector in particular. Now, after talking to the people in the organizations, that issue was raised. It came up. The reviewers of this proposal asked the question. They came up with that question. I don't want to anticipate anything. In this conference's program, our agenda today, we'll have some answers in the afternoon put to that question. So I will not anticipate that, but we are aware of the role, the pioneer role that the third sector organizations have in terms of different audiences. And it is in our bibliography. But again, as I said, in the afternoon this will be discussed in greater detail.
Eu só vou voltar pouco na questão da Denise
Back
também.
to Denise's question,
Eu acho que antes até
I think that even
da gente
before
entrar
we get
se render ao neoliberal também passa pela
before we
questão
surrender to the neoliberals,
da cultura. Então,
there is also this
também
issue
durante o
about
processo, era algo que várias vezes também a gente se
the instrumentalization of culture.
que o Bolo colocou,
But
né,
that's what Bolo also said in his presentation.
O cenário atual
The current
então
scenario
também se
is what it is,
uma adaptação
and so we had to adapt to this new scenario.
E por acaso isto relaciona com
This is related to Rosa's question.
que é qual o mecanismo que
What mechanism can turn results into effective political actions?
eu volto a frisar que eu também
Again,
deste facto
I feel that that is a role that is on your side as leaders, those that work in cultural organizations. In this afternoon, we'll see several examples of this. So, how do we go from diagnosis to action? In this logic of commitment, the idea is that everyone here should pay attention, should listen, should network. So, finally, I just want to congratulate the whole team. A big show of hands to them, a round of applause. And now, a very important part of human well-being, which is lunch. See you later.